The CEO's iced coffee hit his jacket like a slap. She didn't apologize, she attacked. Standing in the marble lobby of Chicago's most exclusive building, Charlotte Bennett stared at the construction worker and his daughter with pure contempt. Her words cut deeper than the winter wind outside. Maybe if you could actually provide for her, she wouldn't be dressed like that. The little girl's eyes filled with tears. The man stayed calm. Too calm. Because Charlotte had just humiliated the one person who could destroy her company's future. And she had no idea who he really was. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The blizzard came without mercy. Mason Reed felt the wind before he saw it. That particular Chicago cold that doesn't just touch your skin, but goes straight through your bones, settling somewhere deep where no amount of coffee or cursing can reach it. He pulled his daughter closer as they walked down Michigan Avenue, her small hand wrapped tight around two of his fingers, the way she'd done since she was barely able to walk. "Daddy, my nose is cold," Ava said, looking up at him with those enormous brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother it sometimes hurt to breathe. "I know, baby. Almost there." Mason adjusted the construction equipment bag on his shoulder. The canvas was worn thin in places, held together more by habit than stitching. Inside, basic tools, a hard hat he hadn't needed in weeks, and the folder containing documents that would change someone's life today, just not in the way they expected. Ava's penguin hat, the one with the stupid felt beak and the googly eyes she'd begged for at Target last month, kept slipping down over her eyebrows. She pushed it back up for the fourth time in as many minutes, her mittens too bulky for the job, but doing it anyway because she was 6 and stubborn and absolutely her father's daughter. The sidewalk was already disappearing under fresh snow. Early December in Chicago meant the city transformed from gray concrete to white chaos in about 20 minutes, and they were right in the middle of that transformation now. Cars moved slowly, their headlights cutting weak beams through the falling snow. A taxi laid on its horn. Someone shouted something that got lost in the wind. "That building?" Ava pointed ahead to where Harrow Tower cut into the low clouds like a blade. 43 floors of steel and glass and money. So much money. "That's the one." "It's really big." "Yeah." "Bigger than the library?" "Way bigger." "Bigger than the whole zoo?" Mason smiled despite the cold gnawing at his face. "Probably not that big." They reached the entrance, a massive revolving door flanked by two traditional doors that looked like they'd been designed specifically to make regular people feel small. A doorman in a long coat stood inside, visible through the glass but not moving to help. Mason had learned a long time ago that guys like that only open doors for certain types of people, and a man in a 15-year-old work jacket with paint stains and a kid in a clearance rack snowsuit didn't qualify. He pushed through the revolving door, felt the blast of heated air, heard Ava's little gasp of delight at the warmth. The lobby hit them like a different planet. Marble floors stretched out in every direction, polished to the kind of shine that made you aware of your boots. The ceiling was 2 stories up, decorated with geometric patterns in gold leaf that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Christmas decorations hung everywhere, not the plastic stuff from drugstores, but real garland, actual pine, enormous red ribbons that looked hand-tied by someone whose entire job was making rich people feel festive. A security desk sat in the center like a command post. 2 guards in crisp uniforms watched everyone who entered with the kind of neutral suspicion that came from years of deciding who belonged and who didn't. Mason felt Ava squeeze his hand tighter. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were wide, taking it all in. The chandeliers, the people in their expensive coats, the way shoes clicked against marble with a sound that announced importance. "Remember what we talked about," Mason said quietly. "That people are just people." "That's right. All this—" He gestured at the lobby. "It's just decoration. Doesn't mean anything about who anybody actually is." A woman in a charcoal pantsuit walked past them toward the elevators, her heels making that confident staccato rhythm. She glanced at Mason and Ava, her expression flickering with something, confusion maybe, or disapproval, before she looked away. The kind of look that asked the question without saying it. What are they doing here? Mason had seen that look his whole life, from teachers who assumed he wouldn't finish high school. from the administrator at the private school who'd raised her eyebrows when he'd shown up for Ava's enrollment meeting still wearing his work clothes because he'd come straight from a job site. From his own father-in-law before Sarah died, back when the old man still thought his daughter had married down. He'd learned to let it slide off, mostly. "Mr. Reed?" Mason turned. A young guy in his 20s approached from the elevator bank. Expensive suit, nervous energy, the kind of eager professionalism that screamed junior associate trying to make partner. Mason recognized him from the emails. Andrew something. Whitfield, maybe. "That's me." Great. We're all set up on 40. Conference room's ready whenever you..." Andrew's eyes dropped to Ava. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite disapproval, but definitely recalculation. "Oh, I didn't realize you'd be bringing my daughter," Mason said flatly. "That a problem?" No, of course not. We didn't prepare for..." Andrew forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's fine, totally fine. Maybe she can wait in the lobby. We have a lovely seating area, very comfortable, and she stays with me." The words came out harder than Mason intended, but he didn't take them back. He'd promised Ava she could come today. She'd been excited all week, ever since he'd explained that Daddy owned a big building in the city, and today they were going to meet the people who wanted to buy it. She'd drawn a picture of Harrow Tower in crayon, all crooked lines and impossible windows, and taped it to their refrigerator between her math homework and the grocery list. No way was she sitting alone in some lobby while lawyers discussed millions of dollars upstairs. Andrew's smile went brittle. "Of course, whatever you prefer. The team's just, well, Ms. Bennett is already here, and she's fairly particular about..." The elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and Charlotte Bennett stepped into the lobby like she owned it, which, in about 3 hours, she technically would. Mason's first impression, power. Not the loud kind that needed to announce itself, but the quiet kind that didn't bother, because everyone already knew. She wore a black coat that probably cost what he used to make in 2 months, cut perfectly to her frame, moving with her like it had been designed specifically for the way she walked. Her hair was pulled back severe and exact. Diamond earrings caught the light, small, tasteful, expensive in that way that whispered instead of shouted. She was on her phone, naturally, talking fast, her voice sharp with the kind of impatience that came from having too many decisions to make and not enough hours to make them. "I don't care what the preliminary audit says, Richard. We're not moving on the Portland property until I see the full environmental report. The full report, not the summary some paralegal threw together." She walked quickly, not really looking where she was going because people like her didn't have to. The world moved around them. "Yes? I understand the timeline. I also understand that we're talking about a $40 million investment. So unless you want to explain to the board why we're suddenly liable for 10 years of groundwater contamination..." She crashed into Mason at full speed. The impact wasn't hard, but it was sudden. Her phone flew from her hand, clattered against the marble. The iced coffee she'd been carrying in her other hand, some elaborate thing with multiple shades of brown and what looked like caramel drizzle, exploded across Mason's jacket in a cold splash that soaked through to his shirt. "Jesus!" Charlotte stumbled back, staring at the coffee spreading across his chest like a stain map. "What the hell?" Mason stood there, feeling the cold liquid seep through fabric, watching it drip onto his boots. Ava had jumped back just in time, but her eyes were wide with shock. "You walked right into me," Mason said evenly. Charlotte bent down, snatched up her phone, checked it for cracks with the kind of urgency usually reserved for actual emergencies. Finding none, she finally looked at him. Really looked. Her expression changed. It started as surprise, probably that he'd spoken at all, then shifted into something else. Assessment. Calculation. Her eyes traveled from his coffee-soaked jacket to his work boots to the canvas bag on his shoulder to Ava standing beside him in her penguin hat and clearance rack snow pants. Mason watched it happen. That familiar sequence. The decision forming behind someone's eyes as they looked at you and decided exactly who you were in about 3 seconds. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, but her tone suggested she wasn't. "Not really. I didn't see you there. You weren't looking. I was on an important call. So that makes it okay to just walk into people?" Something flashed in her eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or surprise that he was pushing back. "Look, I apologized. These things happen. You should probably clean that up before it stains. She said it like he was a spill that needed addressing, like he was the inconvenience here. Mason felt Ava's hand tighten around his fingers. When he looked down, his daughter was staring at Charlotte with an expression he'd seen before. The one she got when kids at school said mean things, when teachers underestimated her, when the world reminded her that it could be randomly, casually cruel. "Daddy's jacket," Ava whispered. "It's okay, baby." Charlotte was already turning away, already moving on, because of course she was. People like her didn't linger on moments like this. They apologized, or said something that sounded like an apology, and then they left the mess for someone else to deal with. But then she stopped, turned back, looked at Ava with an expression that made Mason's jaw tighten. "That's a very colorful hat," Charlotte said. Her tone hit that particular register of false warmth that adults used when they wanted credit for noticing a child without actually engaging with them. Ava didn't respond. She just pressed closer to Mason's leg. Charlotte's gaze shifted back to him, taking in the jacket again, the boots, the bag, making calculations. "Are you here for a delivery?" she asked. "Because the service entrance is around. I'm not making a delivery." "Oh." A pause. "Maintenance?" "No." Her eyebrows drew together slightly, that universal expression of confusion mixed with impatience. The look of someone who'd asked a question they expected to be answered quickly and simply and was now annoyed that it wasn't. "Then what?" She stopped, glanced at Ava again. Something in her expression hardened. "Look, I'm sorry about your jacket, but I'm actually late for a very important meeting. If you need to file some kind of complaint, you can talk to building security." "Ms. Bennett?" Andrew appeared at her elbow like a nervous terrier. "I'm so sorry. I was just coming to escort Mr. Reed upstairs." Charlotte's head snapped toward the junior associate. "What?" "Mr. Reed," Andrew gestured at Mason with a hand that shook slightly. "The seller? For the acquisition meeting? We're running about 10 minutes behind schedule, and I know you wanted to review the final contracts before." The color drained from Charlotte Bennett's face. Not all at once. It happened in stages. First confusion, then realization, then something that might have been horror, if horror could wear a $1,000 coat and diamond earrings. She looked at Mason. Really looked this time. He watched her connect the dots. Watched the moment she understood that the man whose jacket she'd ruined, the man she'd assumed was a delivery driver or maintenance worker, the man she'd spoken to with that particular brand of polite condescension reserved for people she considered beneath her. That man was standing between her company and the most important acquisition of the quarter. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Someone's phone rang in the distance. A heating vent hummed. Outside, snow continued to fall against windows that filtered it into something almost beautiful. Mason didn't say anything, didn't need to. The silence was doing all the work. Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're," she started. "Mason Reed," he said quietly. "Owner of Harrow Tower, the building you're here to buy." Her hand, the one not holding her phone, moved slightly, like she was going to offer it for a handshake, then dropped back to her side when she realized how absurd that would be. You didn't shake hands with someone after you'd just drenched them in coffee and suggested they use the service entrance. "I didn't." Charlotte stopped, started again. "I thought that I was the help." Mason kept his voice level, conversational almost. "Yeah, I got that." Andrew looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. One of the security guards was watching now, his hand resting near his radio like he was trying to decide if this situation required intervention. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Mason saw her straighten her spine, saw the way she pulled that power back around herself like armor. When she spoke again, her voice had regained some of its earlier sharpness. "Let's not make this more awkward than it needs to be," she said. "Obviously there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. You have to admit you don't exactly look like—" She stopped, seemed to realize that finishing that sentence would only make things worse, but Mason finished it for her. "Like what?" he asked. "Like someone who'd own a building like this? Like someone worth $40 million? Like someone you should treat with basic respect?" "That's not what I meant." "No?" Charlotte's eyes flashed. "I apologized for the coffee. I've acknowledged the confusion. What exactly do you want from me here? What did he want? Mason wasn't entirely sure. An actual apology, maybe. Some acknowledgement that she'd judged him entirely on appearance and gotten it completely wrong. Some sign that she understood why that was a problem. But before he could answer, Ava spoke up. You were mean to my daddy. Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the tension like a bell. You didn't say sorry the right way. Charlotte looked down at her, visibly startled, like she'd forgotten the child was there, or maybe like she'd never actually been called out by a 6-year-old before. Ava, Mason said quietly. It's okay. But she was mean. Ava's bottom lip trembled slightly. She spilled on your good jacket, and then she was mean about my hat, and she thought you were... She thought... The little girl couldn't quite articulate it, but she didn't need to. Everyone standing there knew exactly what Charlotte had thought. Charlotte Bennett's expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, discomfort, something that might have been shame buried quickly under a layer of defensive annoyance. I wasn't mean, she said, addressing Ava directly now. I was distracted and in a hurry, and sometimes adults make mistakes when they're busy. Your father and I have important business to discuss, and you made him sad. I didn't... Charlotte stopped, looked at Mason. I didn't make him sad. But Mason felt Ava squeeze his hand 3 times. Their private signal, the one they developed after Sarah died, the one that meant I love you without having to say it out loud. And yeah, maybe his daughter was right. Not sad exactly, but something. Tired, maybe. Tired of this moment that kept repeating throughout his life with different people and different fancy buildings, but always the same underlying assumption, that how you looked determined what you were worth. The meeting, Andrew interjected desperately. We really should. The conference room is ready, and Ms. Bennett's team is already upstairs, and Mr. Chen specifically said he wanted to start promptly at 9:30. Charlotte straightened her coat with sharp, precise movements. Back in control. Back to business. Yes, the meeting. She looked at Mason, her expression now carefully neutral, professional. Shall we? It wasn't really a question. Mason could have pushed it. Could have made her say more, apologize better, acknowledge the full scope of what had just happened. Could have made her uncomfortable enough that the whole meeting started on his terms instead of hers. But Ava was watching, learning. And the lesson he wanted her to learn wasn't about revenge or making people squirm. It was about something else. Something harder to define but more important. Yeah, he said. Let's get this done. They moved toward the elevators. Mason and Ava in front. Charlotte and Andrew following a few steps behind. Mason could feel Charlotte's presence like heat at his back. Could practically hear her mind working, recalculating, trying to figure out how to salvage this. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. They all stepped inside. The space felt smaller than it should, more intimate. The kind of forced proximity that made every breath noticeable. Andrew pressed the button for 40. The doors slid shut. The elevator began its smooth ascent, so smooth you could barely feel it move. Just the numbers climbing on the digital display above the doors. 5, 8, 12. Nobody spoke. Charlotte stood in this corner, her phone in her hand but not looking at it. Mason could see her reflection in the polished elevator doors, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on nothing, that carefully controlled expression people wore when they were trying very hard not to show what they were actually feeling. Ava leaned against his leg, one hand holding his, the other adjusting her penguin hat. 50, 19, 23. Mr. Reed, Charlotte said finally. Her voice was quieter now, less sharp. I really didn't mean to... Don't. She stopped. Don't apologize because you think you have to, Mason continued, still watching her reflection. Don't apologize because there's a business deal at stake. If you're going to say sorry, mean it. Otherwise, let's just get through this meeting and go our separate ways. 27, 31, 35. Charlotte's reflection showed something complicated crossing her face. Anger, maybe, or embarrassment, or both. I do mean it, she said. Do you? Yes. You mean you're sorry you spilled coffee on me? Or you're sorry you assumed I was a delivery driver? Or you're sorry you made those assumptions in front of my daughter? Or you're sorry you got caught doing all of that to someone who turned out to be important? The elevator hummed. The numbers climbed. 38, 39, 40. I'm sorry I was rude, Charlotte said carefully, to both of you. The elevator dinged, the doors opened. Mason looked at her directly for the first time since they'd gotten in. That's a start. He stepped out into the hallway, Ava's hand still in his, leaving Charlotte Bennett to follow in his wake for once instead of the other way around. The 40th floor was all glass walls and recessed lighting, and that particular hush that came from expensive carpet, and people who'd learned to conduct their arguments in whispers. A receptionist sat behind a curved desk made of what looked like polished walnut, her smile professional and empty. "Mr. Reed," she said warmly, "so wonderful to finally meet you in person. The team is gathered in conference room A, right this way." She gestured down the hallway. Her eyes barely touched on Ava and didn't land on Charlotte at all. Interesting. They walked past offices with closed doors and nameplates that announced partners and senior associates, past a break room with an espresso machine that probably cost more than Mason's truck, past abstract art on the walls, the kind that looked like someone had thrown paint at canvas and charged $20,000 for the privilege. Conference room A had a view. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Chicago. The city stretched below them like a model. Even through the snow, you could see the lake in the distance, gray and angry. The room itself was dominated by a massive table made of dark wood, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost $500 each. 6 people waited inside. Lawyers, mostly. Mason could tell by the way they dressed, the way they'd arranged their documents in precise stacks, the way they stood when he entered like they'd all practiced the movement. A couple of financial advisors, probably. And an older man in a suit that cost more than some cars, his silver hair combed back from a face that had learned to hide every thought behind a pleasant smile. Mason. The older man stepped forward, hand extended. "Thomas Chen, we spoke on the phone." Mason shook his hand. Chen had a good grip, firm without being aggressive. The kind of handshake that came from decades of knowing exactly how much pressure to apply. "Thanks for making the trip," Mason said. "Are you kidding, for a property like this?" Chen's smile widened slightly. "I'd have flown in from Singapore if necessary." His eyes dropped to Ava, and something genuine entered his expression. "And who's this?" "My daughter, Ava." "Hi," Ava said quietly. "Hi yourself." Chen crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to her level. "That's quite a hat. You like penguins?" Ava nodded. "Me too. Did you know penguins can hold their breath underwater for up to 20 minutes? Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Scout's honor." Chen straightened, his smile still in place as he looked at Mason. "I've got 3 grandkids. 2 of them would live at the aquarium if we let them." Mason felt something in his chest relax slightly. Not much, but enough. Charlotte had entered behind them, Andrew scurrying at her heels. The other lawyers and advisors immediately shifted their attention to her, their actual client, the person who'd be signing the checks. Chen turned, his professional mask sliding smoothly back into place. "Ms. Bennett, good to see you again." "Thomas." Charlotte's voice was back to business. Crisp, controlled, like the lobby had never happened. "Sorry we're running late. Unexpected delay." "No problem at all. We're right on schedule." Chen gestured to the table. "Why don't we all sit down and get started?" People moved to their seats with the kind of choreographed efficiency that suggested they'd done this many times before. Charlotte took a chair at one end of the table, her team flanking her like guards. Chen sat at the other end. Mason was directed to a seat in the middle, across from what looked like the lead property attorney. Ava climbed into the chair next to him, her penguin hat nearly slipping off as she settled in. The chair was too big for her. Her feet dangled several inches above the floor. She looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the view, the fancy table, the important-looking people. "Is everyone comfortable?" Chen asked, his eyes sweeping the table. "Coffee? Water? We've got fresh pastries from that French bakery on State if anyone's hungry." "Let's just get started," Charlotte cut in. She'd pulled out a leather portfolio, was already flipping it open to reveal perfectly organized documents. "I've reviewed the updated appraisal and I have some questions about the third-floor commercial tenants." "Actually," Mason interrupted quietly, "before we jump into business, I think we need to address something." The room went still. Charlotte looked at him, her expression carefully blank. "Address what?" Mason glanced at Ava, then back at Charlotte, choosing his words with care. "What happened downstairs?" he said. "In the lobby." You could have heard a snowflake land. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. The lawyers exchanged glances. Andrew looked like he might actually faint. Charlotte's jaw tightened. I don't think that's necessary. I do. Mr. Reed, Ms. Bennett walked into me while she was on her phone, Mason said, addressing the room now, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Spilled coffee all over my jacket, then spent the next 2 minutes making assumptions about who I was and why I was in the building. Suggested I use the service entrance. Asked if I was maintenance. He paused. All of this happened in front of my 6-year-old daughter. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier. Chen's pleasant expression had disappeared entirely. He looked at Charlotte with something that might have been disappointment. The lawyers weren't making eye contact with anyone. Charlotte's face had gone pale, then flushed. That's not... You're taking it out of context. What context makes it okay? Mason asked. Not aggressive, just asking. I didn't know who you were. And if I actually had been maintenance or making a delivery, would that make it fine to treat me that way? Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it. Because that's what I can't quite figure out, Mason continued. Are you sorry you were rude to me specifically because I turned out to be the building owner? Or are you sorry you were rude to another human being, period? This is ridiculous. Charlotte's voice had an edge now. We're here to discuss a $40 million transaction, not to have some kind of sensitivity seminar about basic decency? Mason leaned forward slightly. About treating people with respect regardless of what they're wearing or what you assume about their bank account. I treat everyone with respect. Do you, though? The question hung in the air like smoke. Ava tugged on Mason's sleeve. He looked down at her worried face and softened immediately. It's okay, baby, he said quietly. Adults are just talking. Is the pretty lady mad? Pretty lady. Out of the mouths of children. Mason almost smiled, despite everything. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe. Charlotte was staring at Ava now with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite guilt, not quite defensiveness. Something in between. Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short break. Da sake. No. Mason shook his head. No breaks. I want to finish this, but I needed to say my piece first, because here's the thing. He looked directly at Charlotte. You're about to become the owner of a building that houses over 200 businesses and probably 1,000 people who work in those businesses. People who wear all kinds of clothes and do all kinds of jobs. And if you're going to walk through that lobby every day treating people differently based on whether you think they belong there, we've got a problem. I would never... You did. Today. To me. Charlotte's hands were flat on the table, her knuckles white. What do you want me to do, Mason? Grovel? Cancel the deal? What? It was the first time she'd used his first name. Interesting. I want you to understand why it matters, he said. That's all. I want you to sit with that for a minute and actually think about it instead of just being mad that you got called out. The room was so quiet you could hear the heating system cycling on. Chen was watching Charlotte like he was seeing her for the first time. The lawyers were studying their documents with sudden, intense interest. Andrew looked like he was silently composing his resignation letter. And Charlotte Bennett, brilliant CEO, shark in expensive clothing, woman who'd probably crushed 100 negotiations without breaking a sweat, looked lost. I'm not... She stopped, started again. I'm not perfect. I was distracted. I made assumptions. I shouldn't have. Why did you? Mason asked. What? Why did you make those assumptions? Walk me through it. You saw me and Ava, and you immediately decided we didn't belong. Why? Charlotte's eyes flashed. You really want to do this? Yeah, I really do. She sat back in her chair, her arms crossing over her chest. Defensive posture. Mason had seen it 1,000 times. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. Charlotte's voice was tight. You were wearing a work jacket covered in stains, work boots that looked like they'd seen better days, carrying a canvas bag that looked older than me. Your daughter was dressed in, I don't know, clearance sale winter clothes. So yes, I made an assumption. People who own $40 million buildings don't usually look like they just got off a construction site. Why not? Because they don't. I do. You're the exception. Am I? Mason tilted his head slightly. Or am I just the only one you've met who didn't feel like playing dress up? That's not fair. None of this is fair, Charlotte. That's kind of the point. Using her first name felt deliberate, a small claiming of equal ground. She noticed. He saw her notice. Look, Charlotte said, and her voice had changed slightly. Less defensive, more tired. I grew up poor. Like, actually poor, not my parents made me get a summer job poor. I know what it's like to be judged on appearance. I know what it's like to walk into rooms and have people assume you don't belong. So don't stand there and lecture me about, then why did you do it to me? Mason interrupted. If you know how it feels, why did you turn around and do the exact same thing? Charlotte's mouth opened. No words came out. Ava tugged Mason's sleeve again. Daddy, I have to pee. The absurd timing of it, the way a child's basic need could cut through the highest tension, made Mason want to laugh and cry at the same time. Okay, baby, hold on just a second. He looked at Chen. Is there a restroom nearby? Just down the hall to the left, Chen said, clearly grateful for the interruption. Can't miss it. Mason stood, took Ava's hand. Before leaving, he looked back at Charlotte. Think about it, he said quietly. That's all I'm asking. Actually, think about it. Then he walked out with his daughter, leaving the room full of uncomfortable lawyers and one very rattled CEO behind. The hallway felt cooler, quieter. Mason's heart was beating harder than he'd realized. Daddy? Ava looked up at him as they walked. Why was everyone so quiet? Sometimes, Mason said carefully, grown-ups need to hear hard things, and hearing hard things makes them quiet. Like when I have to hear I can't have ice cream before dinner? He smiled despite everything. Kind of like that, yeah. They found the restroom, single occupancy, fancy enough that even the soap dispenser looked expensive. Mason waited outside while Ava went in, listening to her hum something that sounded like a song from that cartoon she liked. His phone buzzed, a text from his foreman. How's the big sale going? Mason typed back, complicated. The bathroom door opened. Ava emerged, her penguin hat now completely sideways. All good? She nodded. The soap smells like flowers. Fancy. They walked back slowly. Mason wasn't in a hurry to return to that room, that table, that conversation he'd started and wasn't sure how to finish. But as they approached the conference room, he heard voices. Not arguing, just talking. Chen's measured tones, Charlotte's sharper responses, the low murmur of lawyers doing what lawyers did. Business, moving forward, because that's what people like them did. They encountered obstacles and they kept moving. Mason stopped just outside the door. You ready to go back in? He asked Ava. She looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. Is the pretty lady still sad? Maybe. Did you make her sad? I don't know. Maybe I made her think about things she didn't want to think about. Ava considered this with the gravity only 6-year-olds could muster when processing adult complications. Mommy used to say thinking hard thoughts makes you smarter, she said finally. Mason's throat tightened. Sarah had said that. Usually when helping Ava with homework, or when Ava complained that math was too hard, or when life in general felt overwhelming for a small person trying to make sense of big concepts. Yeah, he managed. Yeah, she did say that. Then maybe making the pretty lady think hard thoughts is good. Out of the mouths of children, Mason thought again. Out of the mouths of children. He pushed open the conference room door. Everyone looked up. Charlotte's eyes found his immediately, held for a second longer than necessary, then dropped back to the documents in front of her. All set? Chen asked pleasantly. All set. Mason and Ava returned to their seats. The chair still too big for her, her feet still dangling. She'd brought a small notebook and crayons from somewhere. Probably Andrew had scrambled to find something to keep her occupied, and started drawing with the intense concentration the children brought to their art. So, Chen continued, clearly relieved to be back on professional ground, we were just discussing the tenant agreements for the commercial spaces. Ms. Bennett had some questions about the renewal terms. And just like that, they were back in business mode. Back to numbers and clauses, and the mechanical process of transferring ownership of something worth $40 million from one person to another. But something had shifted. Mason could feel it, the way Charlotte kept glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, The way her questions had lost some of their aggressive edge. The way she sat slightly differently in her chair, like she was aware of her posture in a way she hadn't been before. An hour passed. Then another. They worked through commercial leases and residential agreements, discussed property management and maintenance contracts, reviewed the inspection reports and the updated surveys, all the tedious, necessary details that turned a building from something you owned into something someone else owned. Ava drew pictures. First the building again, still crooked, still charming, then what looked like people, though at 6 the distinction between people and stick figures was still pretty fluid. Then penguins, because of course penguins. During a brief lull while the lawyers conferred about something in Section 7, subsection 12, paragraph 4, Charlotte spoke. "What are you drawing?" She was looking at Ava, her voice softer than Mason had heard it yet. Ava held up her picture. "The tower. It's very tall. Daddy says it's really tall in real life, too." "It is." Charlotte paused. "Did you draw the people?" "That's Daddy." Ava pointed to a slightly larger stick figure. "And that's me. And that's you." Charlotte blinked. "Me?" "The pretty lady from downstairs." Ava had given stick figure Charlotte what looked like triangle earrings and a big rectangular thing that was probably meant to be a phone. "You're going to own Daddy's building." Yes, that's right." "Will you take good care of it?" The question was so earnest, so direct, that Charlotte actually seemed at a loss for how to respond. "I'll do my best," she said finally. "Okay." Ava went back to her drawing, satisfied with this answer in a way that only children could be. Mason watched Charlotte's face, saw something complicated moving behind her eyes. Chen was wrapping up his conversation with the legal team. "All right, I think we've got clarity on the commercial tenant situation. Moving on to the residential floors." More hours, more details. Mason's coffee-stained jacket had dried into stiff patches. His back was starting to hurt from the fancy chair that looked comfortable but really wasn't. Ava's energy was flagging. She'd stopped drawing and was leaning against his arm, fighting sleep with the determination of a child who refused to miss anything important. Finally, Chen pushed back from the table with a satisfied sigh. "I think we've covered everything," he said. "Unless there are any other questions or concerns." He looked around the table. The lawyers shook their heads. Charlotte's financial team looked exhausted but satisfied. Andrew looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 hours. "Mr. Reed," Chen asked, "anything else on your end?" Mason thought about it. About the building his father had bought 40 years ago, when it was just a modest office building in a questionable neighborhood. About how the old man had slowly, carefully renovated and expanded it over decades. About how he died before seeing it become what it was now, prime real estate in the heart of downtown Chicago. About how Mason had inherited it and spent 5 years managing it while also raising Ava alone and trying to keep his own construction business afloat and generally feeling like he was drowning most days. About how this sale meant he could finally breathe, could set Ava up for college, could maybe even take a vacation that didn't involve figuring out which bills to pay late, but also about the weight of letting go, of ending a legacy, of being the Reed who sold instead of the Reed who built. "No," he said quietly. "I think we're good." Chen smiled. "Then all that's left is signatures. We'll schedule the closing for next week. Gives everyone time to review the final documents one more time. Ms. Bennett, your team will wire the deposit by end of business Thursday?" "Already arranged," Charlotte said. Her voice was steady, but Mason thought he heard something underneath it. Uncertainty, maybe, or awareness that this wasn't quite the clean victory she'd probably envisioned when she'd walked in this morning. "Excellent." Chen stood, prompting everyone else to stand as well. "Thank you all for your time and patience. This has been remarkably smooth, all things considered." All things considered, Mason almost laughed. People started gathering their things. Lawyers shuffling papers into expensive briefcases. Financial advisors checking phones that had been buzzing silently for hours. Andrew practically bolting for the door like a prisoner granted parole. Mason lifted Ava, who'd finally given up fighting sleep. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her penguin hat askew, her breathing already settling into the steady rhythm of dreams. "I can carry her stuff," Chen offered, reaching for the crayons and notebook. "Thanks." They moved toward the exit in a loose group, but Charlotte hung back. When Mason reached the door, she spoke. "Mr. Reed, Mason, could we talk for a minute?" He turned. She was standing by the window, backlit by the gray Chicago sky, snow still falling in that persistent way that suggested it would continue all day. Mason shifted Ava's weight slightly. "Okay." Chen gave him a look, part concern, part curiosity, but Mason nodded that it was fine. The lawyers filed out. The door closed. Just the two of them in that big room with that big window and that big question hanging between them about what happened this morning and what it meant. Charlotte walked over to the table, picked up one of Ava's drawings, the one with the 3 stick figures. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, not looking at him, "about why I made those assumptions, about whether I was sorry I was rude to you specifically or sorry I was rude, period." Mason waited. "I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew your business, where people talked about you at church and at the grocery store and everywhere in between, where your value was determined by what your parents did and how much money you had and whether you fit in." She set the drawing down carefully. "I hated it. I hated being judged like that. So I worked my ass off to get out. Scholarships and student loans and 80-hour weeks, built a company, made something of myself." "Okay. But somewhere in all that—" She stopped. Her hands were resting on the table edge, gripping slightly. "Somewhere in all that, I became the thing I hated. I became the person who judges, who makes assumptions, who decides someone's worth in 3 seconds based on what they're wearing." She finally looked at him. "I'm not making excuses," Charlotte said. "I'm just trying to explain. I don't think I'm better than other people. I stopped seeing them as people. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Mason said quietly. "It does." "Your daughter asked if I'd take good care of the building." Charlotte's voice cracked slightly, like it was a pet or something, like it mattered beyond just the money. "It does matter. I know that now." She moved away from the table toward the window. "I looked at you this morning and I don't even know what I saw. A complication, an interruption, someone who didn't fit into my schedule or my expectations. I didn't see a person. I definitely didn't see a father just trying to get through a winter morning with his kid. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, a CEO who probably hadn't been truly honest with another human being in years was trying to find words for something she'd maybe never articulated before. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said. "Actually sorry. Not because you turned out to be important, not because there's money at stake, but because I hurt you. And worse, I hurt her." She gestured toward Ava sleeping in his arms. "I made a little girl who was just excited to see her dad's building feel small, and that's—" Her voice broke completely. "That's unforgivable." Mason felt Ava shift against him, mumbling something in her sleep about penguins. "Nothing's unforgivable," he said, "but not everything can be fixed with just saying sorry, either." "I know." "Do you?" Charlotte turned from the window. Her eyes were red. Mason hadn't realized until this moment that she'd been crying. "I want to do better," she said. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I want to try. Will you help me?" It was the last thing Mason had expected her to say. "Help you how?" "I don't know. Show me what I'm not seeing. Tell me when I'm being—" She gestured vaguely. "Whatever I was being this morning, hold me accountable." "Charlotte, we're about to complete a business transaction and then probably never see each other again. Unless we don't." "Unless we don't what? Never see each other again?" She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it was almost shocking coming from someone who'd been so controlled hours earlier. "Your father built something worth protecting. Not just the building itself, but the people, the tenants, the way it exists in the community. I got so focused on the numbers that I almost missed the point entirely." Mason readjusted Ava's weight. His arms were getting tired. "What are you asking?" "Stay involved," Charlotte said. "Consulting basis. Help me transition the management in a way that honors what your father built. Help me not screw it up by only thinking about profit margins and efficiency metrics." "You're serious?" "Completely." Mason looked at this woman, this brilliant, successful, deeply flawed woman who'd started the day by spilling coffee on him and insulting his daughter, and was now standing in front of him with tears on her face asking for help becoming a better person. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Something like relief crossed her face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided. But you'll think about it. Yeah, I'll think about it. They stood there in that enormous conference room, the city spread below them like a promise or a threat, the snow turning everything soft and temporary. I should go, Mason said. Ava needs a real nap, and I need to change out of this coffee-stained jacket. Of course. Charlotte moved toward the door, held it open for him. A small gesture. Maybe meaningless, maybe not. He walked past her into the hallway. Chen was waiting by the elevators with Ava's things, looking concerned. Everything all right? Yeah, Mason said. We're good. The elevator ride down was quiet. Chen didn't push for details, just stood there holding crayons and notebook, occasionally glancing at sleeping Ava with the fond expression of someone who'd raised kids and remembered how quickly they grew. The lobby was busier now, lunch rush starting, people in suits and ties moving with purpose. The security guards had changed shifts, different faces, same watchful eyes. Mason walked through it all, past the marble and the gold leaf and the massive Christmas decorations, and pushed out into the cold Chicago day with his daughter in his arms. The snow had slowed but not stopped. Fat flakes drifted down, lazy and beautiful. The city noise was muffled. Cars moved carefully. Somewhere a siren wailed. Mason started walking, not sure where he was going exactly, just walking. And he thought about his father, about dignity, about the difference between wealth and worth, about what it meant to own something valuable and what it meant to protect something precious, about a woman who'd learned all the wrong lessons from being poor and was maybe, ready to learn some better ones, about his daughter sleeping against his shoulder, trusting him completely to get them home safe through the storm. The snow fell. Chicago breathed. And somewhere behind them, in a tower made of glass and steel and 40 years of history, Charlotte Bennett stood at a window on the 40th floor, watching a man in a stained jacket carry his child through the snow, and wondering if she'd just been given something rare and fragile, a second chance to get it right. The apartment was cold when they got home. Mason kicked the door shut behind them, still carrying Ava, and felt the familiar blast of air that meant the radiator was acting up again. Third time this month. He made a mental note to call the super, then remembered he was about to have enough money that he could just move somewhere with heat that actually worked. The thought felt strange, disorienting almost. He laid Ava on the couch, pulled the throw blanket over her, adjusted her penguin hat one last time before finally taking it off. Her face was peaceful in sleep, cheeks still pink from the cold outside. She'd be out for at least an hour, maybe 2 if he was lucky. Mason peeled off the coffee-stained jacket and held it up to the light. The stain had set in dark and permanent across the front. Ruined. Not that it had been worth much to begin with, but still. It had been his favorite, worn soft in all the right places, broken in over years of job sites and winter mornings, and the general chaos of single fatherhood. He tossed it over a chair and went to the kitchen. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people if they weren't trying to cook at the same time. The building was old, 1920s probably, with radiators that clanged and pipes that groaned and neighbors you could hear through the walls. But the rent was decent, and the landlord mostly left him alone, and Ava had her own room, which was what mattered. Mason filled the coffee pot, his hands going through the familiar motions while his mind stayed stuck back in that conference room. Charlotte's face when she'd apologized for real. The way her voice had cracked. The question she'd asked that he still didn't know how to answer. Stay involved. Help her not screw it up. His phone buzzed. Text from Chen. Pleasure doing business with you. Looking forward to closing next week. Let me know if you need anything before then. Professional, courteous, completely standard. Mason typed back, thanks. Will do. Another buzz. This one from a number he didn't recognize. This is Charlotte Bennett. Andrew gave me your number. Hope that's okay. I meant what I said upstairs. Would really like to discuss the consulting arrangement when you have time. Mason stared at the message. Read it twice. Started to type a response, then stopped. What was he supposed to say? He set the phone down and poured himself coffee that was probably too strong, but that's how he made it these days. Strong enough to taste like a decision. The radiator clanged to life finally, hissing steam. Through the thin walls he could hear Mrs. Kowalski's television, some game show with enthusiastic applause. Normal sounds, normal life, except nothing felt normal anymore. He'd owned Harrow Tower for 5 years, and it had never felt real, even when he was signing documents or reviewing financials or dealing with tenant complaints. It had felt like playing pretend, like he was wearing his father's clothes and hoping nobody noticed they didn't quite fit. His dad had been the real deal. Thomas Reed, who'd started as a union electrician and saved every dollar for 20 years until he could buy his first property, who'd taught himself building management and contract law and commercial real estate through library books and night classes, who'd seen potential in a rundown office building when everyone else saw a teardown. Mason had just inherited it, hadn't earned it, hadn't built it, just woke up one day owning something worth millions because his father's heart gave out at 63 while rewiring a light fixture on the 7th floor. He sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where he and Ava ate breakfast every morning, where she did homework while he reviewed invoices, where they'd cried together the night Sarah died, and he'd had to explain to a 3-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Charlotte. Or not. No pressure. Just wanted you to know the offer stands. Mason picked up the phone, typed, "I'll think about it. Need a few days." Her response came fast. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Then, after a pause, "And Mason, thank you. For today. For saying what needed to be said." He didn't respond to that one, just set the phone down and drank his coffee and listened to Ava breathing in the other room and the radiator hissing and Mrs. Kowalski's game show and all the ordinary sounds of a life that was about to change in ways he couldn't quite picture yet. The snow had stopped by the time Ava woke up. She stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, her hair sticking up in 17 different directions. "Hey, sleepyhead. Is it tomorrow yet?" Mason smiled. "Not quite. Still today." "Oh." She climbed into the chair across from him. "I'm hungry. Grilled cheese? With tomato soup?" "With tomato soup." He made lunch while she told him about her dreams, something involving penguins and a castle made of ice cream and a talking cat who was also a teacher. The logic of 6-year-old dreams, where anything could connect to anything else without explanation. They ate at the table, Ava swinging her legs and asking questions between bites. "Did you sell the tower?" "Almost. One more meeting next week to finish everything." "Then what happens?" "Then it belongs to Ms. Bennett, the pretty lady from this morning." Ava considered this while dipping her grilled cheese in soup. "Will she take care of it like Grandpa did?" That was the question, wasn't it? "I don't know yet," Mason said honestly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." "You should make sure she does." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Because Grandpa worked really hard on it. You told me that." Mason felt something tighten in his chest. "You're right. He did. So you have to make sure." Ava said it with the absolute certainty of a child who believed her father could fix anything, solve anything, make the world work right through sheer determination. He wished he had that kind of confidence. After lunch, Ava wanted to play with her Legos. Mason sat on the floor of her room, helping her build what she insisted was a penguin habitat, but looked more like a colorful disaster with no structural integrity. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of just being together, not needing to fill every moment with words. His phone buzzed twice more over the next hour. Once from his foreman asking about next week's schedule. Once from his sister in Portland, checking in like she did every few days since Sarah died, making sure he was eating real food and not just falling apart. He answered the foreman, ignored his sister for now. He'd call her back later when he had energy for her particular brand of concerned hovering. By dinner time, Mason had made a decision. Not about Charlotte's offer, that still felt too big, too complicated, but about something else. He pulled up Charlotte's number and typed, "Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. I want to talk about the building." Her response came within 30 seconds. "Yes? Where and when?" "Coffee shop on Randolph." "You know Marty's?" "I'll find it." "What time, 10? "I'll be there." Mason set the phone down. Ava was watching him from where she'd sprawled on the floor with her Legos. "Who are you texting?" "Ms. Bennett." "The pretty lady?" "Yeah." "Are you friends now?" Mason thought about that. "I don't know what we are." "Maybe you'll find out tomorrow," Ava said with the wisdom of someone who'd lived exactly 6 years and thought that made her an expert on everything. Maybe, Mason agreed. That night, after Ava was in bed and the apartment had settled into its evening creaks and groans, Mason stood at his bedroom window looking out at the city. Snow covered everything in uneven patches. Christmas lights blinked from neighboring buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled past. He thought about his father, about the last conversation they'd had, 3 days before the heart attack. They'd been standing in the lobby of Harrow Tower, that same marble lobby where Charlotte had crashed into him this morning, and his dad had been complaining about the heating system on the upper floors. Building this old, everything's a compromise, Thomas Reed had said. You fix one thing, something else breaks. But you keep fixing it anyway because people depend on you. Sounds exhausting, Mason had joked. His father had looked at him with those serious eyes that never quite matched his smile. It is, but it's also the point. We don't own things, Mason. We take care of them for a while, and then we pass them on. The only question that matters is whether we left them better than we found them. Mason hadn't understood it then. Not really. He'd been 32 with a failing marriage and a daughter who was barely 3 in a construction business that was just starting to turn a profit. The idea of legacy and responsibility and leaving things better, it had all felt abstract, theoretical. Now, standing in his cold apartment looking out at the city his father had loved, Mason understood. The building wasn't the point. The money wasn't the point. The point was what his father had actually said. People depended on you, and you kept fixing things anyway. Charlotte Bennett was offering him a chance to keep fixing things. The question was whether he trusted her enough to help. Marty's coffee shop was exactly the kind of place Charlotte Bennett would never normally enter. Mason arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a booth in the back, away from the windows. The place hadn't been updated since probably 1987. Vinyl seats patched with duct tape, laminate tables scarred with decades of coffee rings, a jukebox in the corner that only played if you kicked it in the right spot. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that were chipped but clean, and Marty himself, pushing 70, suspenders holding up jeans worn soft as flannel, worked the counter with the efficiency of someone who'd made 10,000 cups of coffee in his life and could do it in his sleep. You want the usual? Marty called over when Mason sat down. Yeah, thanks. Your girl not with you today? School day tomorrow. Couldn't bring her. Too bad. She brightened up the place. Marty started the coffee, then glanced toward the door as it chimed. His expression shifted slightly. Not quite disapproval, but definitely assessment. Charlotte Bennett walked in looking exactly like someone who'd never been in a place like this before. She wore designer jeans, the kind that cost $300 to look perfectly casual, and a cream-colored sweater under a coat that probably had an Italian name Mason couldn't pronounce. Her hair was down today, softer than the severe style from yesterday, but her bearing was the same. Careful. Controlled. She spotted Mason and walked over, her eyes taking in the booth, the duct tape, the general shabbiness of everything with an expression Mason couldn't quite read. This is Marty's, he said as she slid into the seat across from him. I see that. Not what you're used to. No. She set her phone on the table, screen down. A small gesture, but deliberate, giving him her attention. But I asked you to help me see things differently. Might as well start here. Marty appeared with Mason's coffee and a menu he tossed in front of Charlotte. What can I get you? Just coffee, please. Black. You sure? Got fresh apple pie. Made it this morning. Charlotte hesitated. I don't usually... She'll take a slice, Mason interrupted. Trust me. Marty grunted approval and shuffled off. I don't eat pie for breakfast, Charlotte said. It's 10 o'clock, not breakfast. I don't eat pie at 10 o'clock either. You will today. Something in his tone made her stop arguing. She just nodded, settled back against the vinyl seat, and waited. Mason took a sip of coffee that was too hot and tasted like burnt hope and nostalgia. Perfect. I've been thinking about your offer, he said. And? I want to know what you actually want, not the corporate answer, the real one. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Marty returned with her coffee and pie, and she stared at the slice like it was a test she hadn't studied for. Eat first, Mason said. Then we talk. You're very bossy for someone who needed to sell his building. Needed to sell, wanted to sell, different things. She picked up the fork, took a tentative bite. Her expression changed immediately. Surprise, then something like pleasure, then almost annoyance that she was enjoying it. Okay, she admitted. That's actually really good. Marty doesn't do anything halfway. They sat in silence while she ate. Mason watched the shop around them. Morning regulars filtering in, retired guys reading newspapers, a couple of construction workers grabbing coffee before a job, a young woman with a laptop and headphones, probably working remote from somewhere that had Wi-Fi that actually worked. Normal people living normal lives in a city that kept spinning, whether you were rich or poor or somewhere in between. I want to not fail, Charlotte said suddenly. Mason looked back at her. She'd set down the fork, was staring at the remaining pie like it held answers. Fail at what? Everything. The building. The business. Being, she gestured vaguely, a decent person. I spent so long climbing, Mason. So long proving I belonged in rooms where people like me don't usually get to sit. And somewhere in all that proving, I forgot why I wanted to be there in the first place. Why did you want to be there? I don't know anymore. That's the problem. Marty refilled Mason's coffee without being asked. Charlotte pushed her mug toward him, and he filled hers too, his expression neutral but his eyes curious. When I was 16, Charlotte continued after Marty left, my mom worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, cashier during the day, weekend shifts at a laundromat. She worked herself half to death so I could go to a decent school, so I could have a chance she never got. That's a lot of pressure. It was everything. I couldn't fail because she'd sacrificed too much. So I didn't. I got the scholarships, got the degree, got the job, built the company, made the money. She looked up at him. And then one day I'm standing in a marble lobby destroying someone's jacket and insulting their daughter, and I realize I've become exactly the kind of person my mother spent her life being invisible to. Mason traced the rim of his coffee mug. So what changed? You called me out. Your daughter called me out. And I had to sit in that conference room and face the fact that I've spent 10 years becoming successful and about 10 minutes actually thinking about what that success cost. Cost you or cost other people? Both. A guy in paint-speckled overalls walked past their booth toward the counter. Charlotte watched him with an expression Mason recognized, that flicker of calculation, of assessment, of trying to place someone in a hierarchy that didn't actually exist outside her own head. You're doing it right now, Mason said quietly. Doing what? Judging. You looked at that guy and you made an assumption. Charlotte's jaw tightened. I didn't. Yeah, you did. I saw it. And it's okay. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just pointing out that this isn't going to be easy. You can't just decide to be different and have it happen. You've got to retrain yourself, catch yourself in the moment, and choose something else. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than he'd heard it yet. I don't know if I can do that. Then you'll fail, Mason said simply. Not at the business stuff. You'll probably be fine there. But at the rest of it? At being the kind of person who owns a building full of people and actually sees them as people? Yeah, you'll fail. That's harsh. That's honest. Charlotte picked up her fork again, pushed pie around her plate. Your father must have been a really good man. The subject change was abrupt, but Mason let it happen. He was. Not perfect, but good. What did he teach you? That work is about more than just making money. That if you're going to build something, build it right. That the people who clean your building matter as much as the people who rent office space in it. Mason paused. That dignity isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you give other people. I like that. He'd say it better. I'm paraphrasing. Still, I like it. They sat with that for a while. The coffee shop hummed around them. Marty's radio played something old and scratchy. Someone laughed at the counter. Okay, Charlotte said finally. Here's what I want, really want. I want you to tell me the truth about that building, about the tenants, about what matters beyond the numbers in the spreadsheet. I want you to stop me when I'm about to make a decision that prioritizes profit over people. She stopped, struggling. I want to learn how to do this right. And I don't think I can learn it from my lawyers or my financial team or anyone else who thinks the way I used to think. Used to? I'm trying to stop thinking. Mason considered her. The expensive sweater and the careful makeup, and the phone sitting screen down between them like a promise that she was actually listening. but also the uncertainty in her eyes, the genuine fear that maybe she'd gone too far down the wrong path to find her way back. 3 conditions, he said. Okay. 1. I'm not your employee. I'm a consultant. That means when I tell you something, you actually listen. You don't have to do what I say, but you have to hear it. Done. 2. This isn't forever. 6 months, long enough to transition the building, get new management in place, make sure the tenants who've been there for years aren't getting pushed out just because their rent is below market rate. Charlotte winced slightly at that last part, which told Mason everything he needed to know about what her financial team had probably already suggested. Okay, she said. 6 months. And the third condition? Mason leaned forward slightly. You have to actually want to change, not just say you do, not just feel bad about what happened yesterday. Actually want to be different, because if you're just doing this to feel better about yourself, we're wasting each other's time. The challenge sat between them like something physical. Charlotte met his eyes and held them. I want to change. I'm terrified I can't, but I want to try. Good enough, Mason said. They shook hands across the table, her grip firm and dry, and surprisingly warm. A deal made in a coffee shop that was falling apart, between 2 people who had no reason to trust each other, except that sometimes you had to trust someone. So where do we start? Charlotte asked. You finish that pie, Mason said. Then we go talk to some of your tenants. My tenants? You're building now, or almost. Might as well start meeting the people who make it run. Charlotte looked slightly panicked. Today? Right now? You got somewhere more important to be? She opened her mouth, probably to list 17 meetings and calls and things that absolutely couldn't wait. Then she closed it, picked up her phone, sent what looked like a rapid-fire series of texts, and set it back down. Apparently not, she said. They finished their coffee. Charlotte actually cleaned her plate. The pie disappeared in small, deliberate bites like she was proving something to herself. Mason left cash on the table, and they walked out into cold that had teeth. We taking your car, Gus? He asked. Charlotte gestured to a Tesla parked at a meter. Sleek, black, expensive. We're walking, Mason said. It's freezing. Building's 15 minutes away. You'll survive. She looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Just fell into step beside him as they headed east toward the lake, toward downtown, toward Harrow Tower, and all the people who lived and worked inside it without knowing their world was about to shift. They walked in silence for the first few blocks. Chicago in December was a study in contrasts. Christmas decorations fighting against gray skies, holiday cheer bumping up against homeless guys huddled in doorways, the wealthy and the desperate sharing the same frozen sidewalks because winter didn't care about your bank account. What are you thinking? Charlotte asked finally. That you're underdressed for this weather. She laughed, surprised. I meant about the building. I know what you meant. They passed a woman selling flowers from a cart, her hands wrapped in fingerless gloves, her smile automatic and tired. Charlotte glanced at her, looked away, then looked back. Mason watched the internal calculation happen. Charlotte stopped, walked back to the cart. How much for the roses? She asked. $12. Fresh this morning. Charlotte pulled out her wallet, handed over a 20. Keep the change. You sure? Yeah. The woman wrapped the roses in brown paper, handed them over with a smile that had warmed up considerably. Charlotte took them, then seemed to realize she had no idea what to do with a bouquet of roses at 10:30 in the morning while walking through downtown Chicago. Here. Mason took them. We'll give them to Mrs. Patterson. She runs the flower shop on 3. She'll appreciate them. They kept walking, Charlotte glancing back once at the cart like she was trying to figure out what had just happened. That was good, Mason said. It was $12. It was seeing someone. That's worth more than $12. By the time they reached Harrow Tower, Mason's ears were numb and Charlotte's cheeks were pink from cold. They pushed through the revolving door into warmth and marble and the familiar smell of the lobby, some combination of floor polish and coffee from the cafe on the ground floor, and that particular scent old buildings had that was just history compacted into walls. Different security guard today. Ray, an older black man who'd worked the tower for probably 20 years. He looked up when they entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Mason. Mr. Reed, didn't expect to see you today. Hey, Ray, this is Charlotte Bennett. She's going to be taking over the building next week. Ray's expression shifted. Professional interest mixed with the wariness of someone who'd seen enough ownership changes to know they rarely benefited the people at the bottom. Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Bennett. Charlotte extended her hand. Ray shook it, his grip careful. Ray's been here longer than I've been alive, Mason said. He knows this building better than anyone. When something's wrong, he usually knows before the maintenance team does. Is that right? Charlotte was studying Ray with new attention. Building talks if you listen, Ray said simply. You learn the sounds, when the elevator on the east side is about to stick, when the heating system is struggling, when the pipes in the northwest corner are about to freeze. He paused. Your father understood that, Mr. Reed. He'd ask me about the building like I was. Well, like my opinion mattered. It did matter, Mason said. Still does. Ray nodded slowly, but his eyes were on Charlotte now, measuring, waiting to see what kind of owner she'd be. I'd like to learn those sounds, Charlotte said carefully, if you're willing to teach me. It was the right thing to say. Mason saw Ray's shoulders relax slightly. Be happy to, ma'am. They moved past the desk toward the elevators. The roses felt slightly absurd in Mason's hands, but he carried them anyway. That was good, he said quietly to Charlotte as they waited for the elevator. What? Telling him you wanted to learn, not assuming you already knew. I don't know anything about running a building. Yeah, that's why it was good that you said it. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. Mason hit 3. Mrs. Patterson? Charlotte asked. Mrs. Patterson. She's been running wildflower arrangements since before I was born. Tiny shop, barely makes rent most months, but she's been here forever and the building wouldn't be the same without her. The elevator climbed. Charlotte was checking her phone, frowning at whatever she saw there. Problem? Mason asked. My CFO wants to know why I'm not in the office. What'd you tell him? That I'm doing field research. She looked up. Is that what this is? It's whatever you need it to be. The doors opened on 3. The hallway was narrower here than the executive floors, the carpet worn but clean, the lighting slightly dingy. Doors on either side led to small commercial spaces. Accountants, insurance agents, a photography studio, a law office that specialized in immigration cases. And at the end of the hall, tucked into a corner unit that couldn't have been more than 400 square feet, wildflower arrangements. The shop was exactly what its name suggested. Flowers everywhere, bursting from buckets and hanging from the ceiling and crowding every available surface. The smell was overwhelming in the best way. Roses and lilies and something green and alive that cut through the winter cold still clinging to Mason's jacket. Behind the counter, surrounded by stems and ribbon and her life's work, stood Mrs. Patterson. She was probably 70, maybe older, with white hair pulled back in a bun and hands that moved with the quick confidence of someone who'd arranged 10,000 bouquets and could do it blind. She looked up when they entered, her face creasing into a smile that made her eyes disappear. Mason Reed, as I live and breathe. Hey, Mrs. P. Where's that beautiful girl of yours? School. I'll bring her by this weekend. You better. I've got chocolate I've been saving for her. Mrs. Patterson's eyes shifted to Charlotte, curious but not unfriendly. And who's this? Charlotte Bennett. She's buying the building. The smile didn't exactly fade, but it changed, became more careful. I see, Mrs. Patterson said. Well, welcome, I suppose. Mason held out the roses. These are for you. Oh, you sweet boy. You didn't have to. She stopped, looking at Charlotte. These from you, dear? Charlotte nodded. I bought them a few blocks over. Mason thought you'd appreciate them. I do. They're lovely. Mrs. Patterson took the roses, unwrapped them with efficient movements, and immediately started trimming the stems. Though I'll tell you, the woman who sold you these is overcharging. These are day-old at least. See how the outer petals are starting to brown? Still pretty, but not fresh. Oh. Charlotte looked slightly embarrassed. I didn't notice. Most people wouldn't. Takes years to know what to look for. Mrs. Patterson was already working the roses into an arrangement with greens and baby's breath pulled from nearby buckets. Her hands moved like water. So you're the new owner. What's that mean for shops like mine? The question was direct. No corporate dancing around. Just a woman who'd spent 40 years in business and knew when to ask the hard questions. Charlotte glanced at Mason. He gave her nothing, This was her show. I'm still figuring that out, Charlotte said honestly. What would you want it to mean? Mrs. Patterson's hands didn't stop moving, but her eyes sharpened. I'd want it to mean you're not going to triple my rent so you can put in some chain store that sells flowers wrapped in plastic. Is that what you're worried about? It's what happens. New owner comes in, sees that half the shops on this floor are paying below market rate, decides to clean house. Out with the old, in with the profitable. She finished the arrangement, stepped back to assess it. I've seen it happen to friends in other buildings. Hell, I've seen it happen in this building back in the 80s before Mr. Reed bought it. My father, Mason clarified quietly. Your father, Mrs. Patterson confirmed, looking at him with real affection, understood that cheap rent now is better than no rent later. That keeping good tenants who pay on time is worth more than squeezing every dollar out of a space. Charlotte was listening intently. Did he ever raise your rent? Sure, cost of living increases mostly. Couple times when property taxes went up and he had to pass some of that along. But he'd give me warning, let me prepare, and he never asked for more than I could actually pay. Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron. That's all any of us want, Ms. Bennett. Fair rent, fair treatment, and enough respect not to be pushed out just because we don't fit someone's vision of what the building should be. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Charlotte absorbed them without flinching. What if I promised you wouldn't be pushed out? I'd want it in writing. Okay. Mrs. Patterson blinked, surprised. Okay? If you want it in writing, we'll put it in writing. Lease renewal, controlled rent increases, whatever makes you feel secure. Charlotte glanced at Mason. That's reasonable, right? Very, Mason said. Well, Mrs. Patterson looked between them, recalculating. I wasn't expecting that. What were you expecting? Charlotte asked. Corporate talk about market rates and maximizing value, and how you're sure we can work something out while really meaning you've already decided to get rid of me. Charlotte's expression tightened, not with anger, but with something that looked like recognition, like she was hearing her own planned speech reflected back at her and realizing how it sounded. I'm trying to do better than that, she said quietly. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. Because this building needs someone who'll do better. It deserves that. They talked for another 20 minutes. Mrs. Patterson showed them around her tiny shop, explaining her business with the easy confidence of someone who knew her craft completely. How she sourced flowers from a supplier on the south side who gave her better prices than the big distributors. How she'd built relationships with event planners and wedding venues across the city. How some months were feast and others were famine, but it averaged out over the year. Charlotte asked questions, real ones, not the kind designed to sound interested while already knowing the answers, but actual curiosity about how a small business survived in an expensive city. When they finally left, Mrs. Patterson sent them off with a small arrangement, white roses and evergreen, tied with silver ribbon. For your table, she told Charlotte, reminds you that beautiful things can grow in small spaces. Back in the elevator, Charlotte held the arrangement carefully. She was testing me, she said. Yeah. Did I pass? I don't know. Ask me in 6 months. They visited 4 more tenants that afternoon. An accounting firm run by 2 brothers who'd been in the building for 15 years. A legal aid office that provided free services to low-income families and operated on grants so thin they barely covered rent. A photography studio where a woman in her 30s created portraits that lined the walls in black and white beauty. And finally, a small tech startup, 6 people crammed into a space designed for 3, all of them young and optimistic and completely convinced their app was going to change the world. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Wariness, questions about rent increases and lease renewals. Charlotte listening more than talking, making promises carefully, taking notes on her phone about concerns and requests and the small details that made each business unique. By the time they finished, it was almost 4. The winter sun was already starting to fade, throwing long shadows across the city. They stood in the lobby, both exhausted. That was harder than I expected, Charlotte admitted. What part? All of it. Looking at people and seeing their whole lives wrapped up in a lease agreement. Knowing that my decisions about rent increases could mean the difference between someone staying in business or closing their doors. She rubbed her eyes. Numbers on a spreadsheet are easy. People are complicated. Welcome to property management. Is it always like this? If you're doing it right, Charlotte's phone had been buzzing periodically all afternoon. She pulled it out now, scrolled through what looked like approximately 8 million messages. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. "Conference call with investors in 20 minutes. "Okay. But this was good. Really good. Can we do it again?" "Yeah, Thursday work for you?" "I'll make it work." She started toward the door, then turned back. "Mason?" "Yeah. Thank you. For not letting me off easy. For making me actually see all this." "You're welcome." She left in a swirl of expensive coat and clicking heels, and Mason stood in the lobby of his father's building, his building, for one more week, and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Ray looked up from the security desk. "She gonna be okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Mason said honestly, "but I think she's going to try." "That's something, at least." "Yeah," Mason agreed, "that's something." He walked home through streets that had gone from afternoon to evening without him noticing, thinking about dignity and responsibility and his father's voice in his head saying that you don't own things, you just take care of them for a while. Thinking about a woman who'd spent years becoming successful and was just now learning what that success should actually mean. Thinking about Ava, who'd be waiting for him with homework questions and stories about school and absolute faith that her dad could handle whatever came next. The snow started again as he reached his building. Fat flakes drifting down like the sky couldn't make up its mind. Mason stood on the sidewalk looking up at his apartment window where a light was already on. Mrs. Kowalski watching Ava until he got home, and felt the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. But also something else, something that felt almost like hope. The call came at 2 a.m. Mason jerked awake to his phone vibrating on the nightstand, the screen too bright in the darkness. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Nothing good happened at 2 a.m., but something made him answer. "Yeah?" "Mr. Reed, this is Sandra from Dispatch at Harrow Tower. We've got a situation." Mason sat up, already reaching for his jeans on the floor. "What kind of situation?" "Pipe burst on 12. Water's coming down into 11 and 10. Ray called emergency maintenance, but they're saying 45 minutes minimum, and the water's... It's bad, Mr. Reed, real bad." He was already moving, phone wedged between his shoulder and ear, pulling on clothes in the dark. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep calling maintenance. See if you can get anyone there faster." "Yes, sir." Mason ended the call and stood in his bedroom, heart pounding. Through the wall he could hear Mrs. Kowalski's television still on. The woman never slept. He knocked quietly, waited for her shuffle to the door. "Mason, what's wrong?" "Emergency at the building. Can you stay with Ava?" Mrs. Kowalski was already nodding, already moving past him toward Ava's room. "Go. I'll sleep on your couch. The girl won't even know you were gone." "Thank you." He grabbed his keys and wallet, stopped at Ava's door just long enough to see her sleeping peacefully, penguin stuffed animal clutched to her chest. Then he was out the door and down the stairs and into his truck that protested starting in the cold. The drive downtown was empty streets and red lights he barely stopped for. His mind was running through scenarios. How bad was the burst? Which tenants were affected? What kind of damage were they looking at? 12 was mostly commercial. 11 and 10 were residential. People sleeping in their apartments while water poured through their ceilings. He made it in 18 minutes. The lobby was chaos. Ray at the security desk on 3 phones at once, his usual calm replaced by controlled urgency. A woman in pajamas and a winter coat clutching a cat carrier and crying. 2 guys from 11 standing in wet socks, their expressions shell-shocked. And water running from the elevators, pooling on the marble. Security trying to contain it with towels that were already soaked through. "Mr. Reed, thank God." Ray's relief was visible. "Maintenance is still 20 minutes out. The shutoff valve for that section is stuck, and we can't..." "Where's it coming from?" "Utility closet on 12. Frozen pipe finally gave up." Mason was already moving toward the stairs. "Call everyone on 10 and 11. Get them out if they're not out already. And someone get industrial fans up here before this marble warps." He took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots echoing in the concrete stairwell. 12 was worse than he'd imagined. Water was running down the hallway like a river, pouring from under the utility closet door. He could hear it inside. That particular sound of water under pressure finding freedom. Mason tried the door. Locked. Of course it was locked. He pulled out his phone, called the super's emergency line. Voicemail. He tried the property manager. Same thing. Everyone asleep or ignoring their phones or just gone. He looked at the door, looked at the water, made a decision. The kick took 3 tries. His shoulder would hurt tomorrow, but the door frame splintered and he was in, water immediately soaking his jeans to the knee. The pipe had split along a seam, spraying water in an arc that was hitting the far wall with enough force to dent the drywall. The shutoff valve was right where it should be. Mason waded over, grabbed it, pulled. Nothing. He pulled harder, putting his back into it, the metal cold and stubborn under his hands. The valve had probably been closed once 5 years ago and never moved since. He pulled until his hands hurt, until he thought something might break. The valve or his grip. He wasn't sure which would go first. Then it moved. Just a fraction, then more. Then suddenly it was turning and the water pressure dropped and the spray became a stream, became a drip, became nothing. Silence except for water still running out the door, and his own breathing harsh in his ears. Mason stood in ankle-deep water in a utility closet at 2:30 in the morning and laughed. Just a short, breathless sound that wasn't really funny, but what else could you do? His phone rang. Charlotte. "I heard," she said without preamble. "How bad?" "Bad. Pipe burst on 12, flooded down into 2 residential floors. How did you—" "Ray called me. I'm 10 minutes away." "You don't need to—" "I'm already in the car, Mason. Is the water stopped?" "Yeah, just now." "Good. I'm bringing my contractor and a claims adjuster. And just hold on, I'm coming." She hung up before he could argue. Mason waded back out into the hallway where water was still spreading, finding every low point in the old floor. He started knocking on doors, checking offices, making sure everyone was out. Most were empty. It was the middle of the night on a Tuesday. But the law office at the end was occupied. And when he opened the door, he found a young guy at a desk surrounded by files, headphones on, completely oblivious. "Hey!" The guy jumped, pulled out his headphones. "What the— Water main break. You need to get out. Now. But I have a brief due tomorrow, and now." Something in Mason's tone got through. The guy grabbed his laptop and ran. By the time Mason made it back downstairs, Charlotte was there. She'd thrown on jeans and a sweatshirt that might have been the most casual thing he'd ever seen her wear. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, just a woman who'd rolled out of bed and driven across the city because her building was flooding. Except it wasn't her building yet. Wouldn't be for another 5 days. But she was here anyway. "Show me," she said. He showed her. The utility closet, the water damage. The residential units where ceiling tiles had collapsed and carpet was soaked through, and people's lives had been disrupted by something as simple and catastrophic as frozen water finding a weak point. Charlotte walked through it all, her face getting tighter with each new discovery. Behind her came a man in Carhartt overalls who Mason assumed was the contractor, and a woman in a business suit despite the hour who was definitely the insurance adjuster. 12 units affected, the adjuster was saying, her voice crisp and professional. 6 residential, 6 commercial. We're looking at significant remediation costs, carpet replacement, drywall repair, potential mold mitigation. "How much?" Charlotte asked. "Rough estimate? 60 to 80,000. Maybe more depending on what we find once we open up the walls." Charlotte didn't flinch. "Do it. Whatever needs to be done. And I want temporary housing arranged for the residential tenants by tomorrow. Hotel rooms, corporate apartments, whatever. They're not living in water damage while we fix this." "Ms. Bennett, the closing isn't for another week. Technically, this is still Mr. Reed's." "I don't care about technically. These are people and they need help. Make it happen." The adjuster nodded and disappeared to make calls. Charlotte turned to Mason. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "You're soaked and shivering and you kicked down a door." She gestured at his shoulder, which he'd been trying not to favor. "Did you hurt yourself?" "It's nothing." "Mason," I said, "I'm fine." They stared at each other in a flooded hallway at 3 in the morning, both too tired and too stubborn to back down. Finally, Charlotte sighed. "At least get some coffee. There's a 24-hour place 2 blocks over. I'll handle things here." "It's my building." "For 5 more days. After that, it's mine, and this is practice." She softened slightly. "Please. You got the water stopped. You got people out. Let me take it from here." Mason wanted to argue. Wanted to stay and oversee everything because that's what his father would have done. But his shoulder hurt and his jeans were soaking wet, and he was so tired he could barely think straight. 1 hour, he said. Then I'm back. Deal. He walked out into the December cold that felt good against his flushed face. The 24-hour diner Charlotte mentioned was exactly where she said, all fluorescent lights and tired waitresses and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long. Mason slid into a booth, ordered coffee and eggs he didn't really want, but his hands needed something to do. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Kowalski. Girl's still sleeping. Take your time. Another from Ray. Miss Bennett's got a whole team here. Never seen anyone move this fast at 3 a.m. Mason stared at that second message for a long time. He'd assumed Charlotte's offer to help was performative, corporate responsibility theater, the kind of thing executives said in meetings but delegated to subordinates when actual work was required. But she was there, in jeans and a sweatshirt, coordinating contractors and insurance adjusters and emergency housing at 3 in the morning for a building she didn't even own yet. Maybe she really did want to change, or maybe she just wanted to prove she could. The eggs came. Mason ate mechanically, not tasting anything. Through the window, he could see snow starting again, those small, dry flakes that meant the temperature was dropping. Bad news for any other pipes that might be on the edge. His phone rang. Not Charlotte this time, his sister. Do you know what time it is? He answered. Do you know you're all over the building's emergency contact list, and I got 3 calls asking if you were okay? Emma's voice was sharp with worry. What happened? Pipe burst. I'm handling it. Handling it how? Mason, you look like hell. You can't see me. I can hear you. You sound like hell. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you... Emma, I'm fine. You're not fine. You haven't been fine since Sarah died, and now you're selling Dad's building and dealing with emergencies at 3 a.m., and I have to go. Mason, he hung up, felt immediately guilty. Emma meant well. She always meant well. But he didn't have energy for her particular brand of concerned hovering right now. The waitress refilled his coffee. Mason wrapped his hands around the mug and stared at nothing. The truth was, Emma was right. He wasn't fine. Hadn't been fine for 3 years, just good at pretending. Good at getting up every morning and making Ava breakfast and going to work and handling whatever crisis came up and falling into bed exhausted enough that he didn't have time to think about how not fine he actually was. Selling the building was supposed to make things easier. Give him breathing room. Let him focus on just being Ava's dad instead of juggling property management and construction work and the constant low-level panic that he was failing at everything. But sitting in this diner at 3:30 in the morning, wet jeans going stiff with cold, shoulder throbbing from kicking down a door, this didn't feel easier. This felt like everything was changing and he had no control over any of it. His phone buzzed again. Charlotte, contractors say they can start remediation at 6 a.m. All displaced tenants have hotel rooms arranged. You should go home. Get some sleep. He typed back, coming back now. You said 1 hour. It's been 45 minutes. Close enough. Mason, I'm coming back. He paid and walked out into cold that bit at his wet clothes. The walk back to Harrow Tower felt longer than it should. His shoulder was definitely going to bruise. His boots squelched with water that had soaked through to his socks. But he kept walking. The lobby had been transformed. The water was mostly contained now, fans running loud enough to make conversation difficult. The maintenance crew had finally shown up, better late than never, and were working with Charlotte's contractor on damage assessment. Charlotte stood in the middle of it all, phone to her ear, managing 3 conversations at once with the kind of multitasking that would be impressive if it wasn't also slightly terrifying. She saw Mason come in and held up a finger. 1 minute. He waited, watching her work. The way she spoke to the contractor was different than how she spoke to the insurance company was different than how she spoke to the displaced tenant she was clearly on the phone with now. Adjusting her tone, her approach, her entire demeanor to match what each situation needed. It was manipulation, maybe. Or maybe it was just competence. I'm so sorry for the disruption, Mrs. Chen. Yes, the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. A suite, not just a room. And all your expenses covered, of course. We'll have you back in your apartment as soon as possible, I promise. Pause. No, thank you for being so understanding. I know this is difficult. She ended the call and turned to Mason. You didn't go home. Neither did you. It's going to be my building. It's still mine. They were back to the staring contest. Mason wondered if this was just what they did now. challenged each other in hallways and conference rooms, and flooded lobbies until one of them gave in. This time, Charlotte broke first. "Your shoulder," she said. "You're favoring it." "It's fine." "Let me see." "Charlotte." She stepped closer, reached for his jacket. Mason caught her hand without thinking, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. They both froze. Her wrist was small in his hand, delicate. He could feel her pulse racing against his palm. "Sorry," he said, letting go. Reflex. "It's okay." But she was looking at him differently now, like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. The moment stretched out, made awkward by the noise around them and the exhaustion pressing down and whatever had just passed between them that neither one wanted to acknowledge. Ray appeared at Charlotte's elbow, breaking the tension. "Miss Bennett, the contractor needs you upstairs." "Right. Yes, of course." She glanced at Mason once more. "Are you staying?" "For a while." "Okay. I'll be on 12 if you need me." She left. Mason stood in the lobby feeling like he'd just dodged something he couldn't quite name. The next several hours blurred together. Contractors coming and going, insurance documentation, calls to tenants. The sun came up pale and weak through the lobby windows, not really changing anything except making the mess more visible in daylight. Somewhere around 7, Charlotte came back downstairs looking more exhausted than Mason had ever seen her. She'd gotten her sweatshirt wet somehow, and her hair was falling out of its ponytail, and there was drywall dust on her cheek. "Damage is contained," she said. "Contractors are starting remediation. All tenants are taken care of. I think we're okay." "You did good," Mason said. "We did good." "No. This was you. You didn't have to be here. Could have let it be someone else's problem for 5 more days." Charlotte sat down on one of the lobby benches, not caring that her jeans were already filthy. "That's not how I want to do things anymore. Even at 3 in the morning? Especially at 3 in the morning. That's when you find out who someone actually is. Not in meetings or negotiations. In the middle of the night when something breaks, and you have to choose whether to show up or not." Mason sat down next to her. Not too close, just 2 tired people on a bench in a lobby that smelled like wet carpet and industrial fans. "My father used to say something like that," he said. "That character is what you do when nobody's watching." Smart man. He was, until his heart gave out in a utility closet fixing a light fixture he could have hired someone to fix. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Do you resent him for that? For working himself to death?" "Sometimes. Most times I just miss him." Mason rubbed his face. "He left me this building, and I've spent 5 years feeling like I didn't deserve it. Like I was just keeping it warm until someone who actually knew what they were doing came along. And now someone has." "Now someone has," he agreed. "And I'm terrified you're going to turn it into something he wouldn't recognize." The honesty surprised him, but it was too late to take it back. Charlotte didn't look offended, just thoughtful. What would he want it to be? Profitable enough to maintain, fair enough to be proud of, useful enough to matter. Mason gestured at the lobby, the building, everything. He could have sold this place 10 years ago for twice what I'm selling it for now. Could have retired rich, but he kept it because he believed buildings should serve their communities, not just their owners. That's a lot of pressure to live up to. Yeah, it is. They sat in silence while around them the building woke up to the crisis. Early morning tenants arriving for work and being redirected. Contractors hauling equipment. The distant sound of industrial fans running non-stop. "I want to do right by this place," Charlotte said finally. "By your father's legacy. By you. I'm just not sure I know how yet. That's why I'm staying on for 6 months. Is it? Or are you staying on because you don't know how to let go?" The question hit harder than Mason expected. He didn't have an answer. Charlotte's phone rang. She glanced at it, sighed. "My office. They're wondering where I am." "You should probably go." "Probably." But she didn't move. Just sat there looking at her phone like it was a test she didn't want to take. "Do you ever get tired of it? Of always being responsible? Of always being the one who has to show up?" "Every day." "But you do it anyway." "I have a daughter. I don't get the luxury of not showing up." Charlotte nodded slowly. Then she stood, brushed off her jeans in a gesture that did exactly nothing. I'm going to go home. Shower. Change. Pretend I'm a functioning executive for a few hours. But I'll be back this afternoon. We should walk through the damaged units together. Make sure the contractors aren't missing anything. Okay? She started to walk away, then turned back. Mason? Yeah? Thank you. For calling that valve stuck instead of broken. For kicking down the door. For being here. It's my building. For 5 more days, she reminded him. After that, you could have told me to handle it myself, but you didn't. That means something. She left before he could respond. Mason sat alone on the bench for a while longer. The lobby was getting busier now. Ray had been replaced by the day shift security guard. Maintenance crews were coordinating with contractors. Life moving forward because that's what life did even when you were exhausted and uncertain and not sure what came next. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Kowalski. Girls awake, fed her breakfast. When you coming home? He checked the time, almost 8. He'd been up for 6 hours. Felt like 6 days. Soon. Thank you for staying with her. Anytime, sweetheart. You know that. Mason pushed himself up from the bench. His shoulder protested. His jeans had finally dried, but now they were stiff and uncomfortable. He needed sleep and a shower and about 12 hours to process everything that had happened since the call at 2 a.m. But first he needed to go home and be Ava's dad. Make her lunch. Help with homework. Pretend that everything was normal and fine and that he had any idea what he was doing. The walk home was quiet. Chicago waking up around him, people heading to work, the city reset overnight into something that looked the same but felt different somehow. When he opened his apartment door, Ava launched herself at him with the force of a very small cannonball. Daddy, Mrs. K said there was an emergency. Was it scary? Did you save people? Mason caught her, lifted her despite his protesting shoulder, held her close. She smelled like maple syrup and childhood and everything that mattered. It wasn't scary, he lied. Just a broken pipe. But we fixed it. Like how you fixed my bike? Kind of like that, yeah. You're a good fixer, Daddy. He set her down, ruffled her hair. Mrs. Kowalski was standing in the kitchen doorway, her expression knowing. Long night? She asked. Long night, he confirmed. Go sleep. I'll take her to school. You don't have to... Go. Sleep. Before you fall over. Mason didn't have energy to argue. He thanked her, kissed Ava goodbye, and stumbled to his bedroom where he collapsed on top of the covers, still wearing his stiff jeans and damp boots. He was asleep in seconds. When he woke up, it was 2 in the afternoon, and his phone was full of messages. From Charlotte updating him on the contractors. From the insurance company asking for documentation. From his sister asking if he was okay. From tenants thanking him for responding so quickly. And one from a number he didn't recognize. This is Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop. Heard about last night. You're a good man like your father was. The building's lucky to have you both. Mason read that message 3 times. Then he got up, showered, changed into clean clothes, and headed back downtown because apparently he couldn't stay away even when he tried. Charlotte was already there when he arrived. She'd changed too, back to business casual, hair fixed, makeup in place. But there was something different about how she moved through the building. More careful, more aware. Like she was seeing it for the first time even though she'd been here dozens of times before. They walked the damaged units together, 10 and 11, where water had turned ceilings to mush and ruined carpet and turned people's homes into construction zones. Charlotte took notes on everything, not just the physical damage, but the personal stuff. Family photos that had gotten wet, a kid's homework ruined, an elderly man's medication that needed to be retrieved before mold remediation began. We need to do better than hotel rooms, she said in one particularly damaged unit. We need to help them actually live, not just exist in temporary housing. That's going to be expensive. I don't care, these are people's homes. They checked on the commercial units next. The law office where the young associate had been working late was fine, far enough from the water. But an architecture firm on 10 had lost equipment and files and was looking at weeks of recovery. Charlotte spent an hour with the firm's owner, a woman in her 50s who was trying very hard not to cry. We have insurance, the woman kept saying. We'll be fine. It's just, we have a pitch next week for the biggest project we've ever bid on, and now... What do you need? Charlotte asked. I'm sorry? To make that pitch, what do you need? Temporary office space, probably, equipment, somewhere to work while our space gets fixed. Charlotte pulled out her phone, made 2 calls, and within 15 minutes had arranged for the architecture firm to use an empty suite on 15 until their space was ready. The woman stared at her. You're just giving us space? I'm renting it to you for $1 a month until you're back in your office. That work? Yes. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll nail that pitch. Mason watched this exchange from the doorway. Watched Charlotte being exactly what the building needed in that moment. Not a landlord extracting maximum value, but someone who understood that helping people succeed was how you built something that mattered. When they left the architecture firm, Charlotte looked drained. That was good, Mason said. That was expensive. My CFO is going to have a stroke when he sees this month's numbers. But it was still good. Yeah. She smiled, tired but genuine. It was. They grabbed coffee from the lobby cafe. Real coffee, not the stuff from Marty's that tasted like nostalgia and regret. Sat at one of the small tables while around them the building hummed with activity. So, Charlotte said, 5 days until closing. 5 days. You nervous? Terrified. Me too. They sat with that admission. Two people about to complete a transaction that would change both their lives in ways neither could quite predict. Can I ask you something? Charlotte said. Sure. Why are you really staying on as a consultant? And don't say it's about protecting your father's legacy or making sure I don't screw up. What's the actual reason? Mason thought about lying, about giving her the corporate answer that would sound good and mean nothing. But they'd been up together at 3 a.m, fighting water and exhaustion, and he owed her more than that. I don't know how to not be connected to this building, he said. It's been my whole adult life, my father's whole life. And when I sell it, I'm supposed to just, what? Walk away? Pretend it doesn't matter anymore? I can't do that. I don't know how. So you're staying because you're not ready to let go. Yeah, I guess I am. Charlotte nodded like she understood. That's honest. I appreciate honest. Your turn. Why did you really show up at 3 a.m.? You could have sent your property manager, could have handled it in the morning. Why come yourself? She was quiet for a long time. Because I wanted to prove something. To you, to myself. That I'm not just... She gestured vaguely. That I'm not just someone who shows up for meetings and signs checks. That I can actually do the work. Be the kind of owner this place deserves. You proved it. Did I? You were there. You made decisions. You helped people. Yeah, you proved it. Charlotte looked at him over her coffee cup, something complicated in her expression. It's strange. A week ago, I would have handled that pipe burst completely differently. Called my property manager, let them coordinate everything. Shown up in the morning to review damage reports, stayed removed. What changed? You made me look at that flower shop owner, and the lawyer, and all those people whose lives exist in this building. Made me see them instead of just seeing units and rent rolls. She set down her cup. It's harder this way, caring about them. It would be easier to just run the numbers and make decisions based on profit margins. Easier isn't always better. No, it's not. Around them, the cafe was filling up with the late afternoon crowd. Office workers grabbing caffeine for the final push to 5 o'clock. A couple of students with laptops and textbooks. The normal pulse of a building full of people living their lives. Mason's phone buzzed. Text from Ava. Did you fix everything? He smiled and typed back. Still working on it. You'll fix it. You always do. The simple faith of a 6-year-old. That her dad could fix anything. Be anywhere. Handle whatever broke. He wished he had that kind of confidence in himself. Charlotte was watching him. Everything okay? Yeah, just my daughter checking in. She's sweet, the way she defended you in the lobby that first day. Charlotte shook her head. I felt about 2 inches tall. You should have. I did. Still do sometimes. Good. Means you're learning. They finished their coffee, made plans to meet again Thursday to walk through tenant renewals and lease negotiations. Charlotte left first, back to her office, and the pile of work she'd ignored all day. Mason stayed a while longer, watching the building move around him. Ray caught him on his way out. You heading home? Yeah, I got a kid who needs dinner. You're doing good work here, Mr. Reed. Both of you. Your father would be proud. Mason felt his throat tighten. Thanks, Ray. I mean it. This place. It matters. And you two are making sure it keeps mattering. That's worth something. Walking home through streets going dark, snow starting again in those gentle flakes that meant winter settling in for real, Mason thought about what mattered. Not the money from the sale, though that would help. Not the building itself, though that was significant. What mattered was that Charlotte Bennett had shown up at 3 in the morning, that she'd helped an architecture firm keep their dream alive, that she was learning to see people instead of units. What mattered was that maybe, just maybe, his father's building was going to someone who'd take care of it the right way. And maybe that was enough to let go. Or start learning how, anyway. The closing was scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. Mason woke up that morning with a knot in his stomach that coffee and determination couldn't untangle. He made Ava breakfast, pancakes shaped like crooked stars because that's what she'd asked for, and tried to act like this was just another day. Like he wasn't about to sign away 40 years of his family's history in a conference room downtown. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Ava asked around a mouthful of pancake. "Why would I be sad?" "Because you're giving away Grandpa's building." Mason set down his coffee mug. "I'm not giving it away, I'm selling it, and the money's going to help us do a lot of things. Maybe even take a vacation." "To where?" "I don't know yet. Where do you want to go?" Ava thought about this with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. "Somewhere with penguins. Penguins live in cold places. I like cold. We live in Chicago. It's cold here." "Different cold. Adventure cold." Mason smiled despite the knot in his stomach. "Okay, adventure cold. We'll figure it out." He dropped her at school, watched her run through the doors with her backpack bouncing and her penguin hat slightly askew. Then he drove downtown through morning traffic that moved like sludge, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The law firm handling the closing was on the 30th floor of a building 3 blocks from Harrow Tower. Mason arrived 20 minutes early and sat in the waiting area trying to breathe normally. The receptionist offered him coffee he didn't want. Business news played on a mounted television with the sound off. Everything felt surreal. Charlotte arrived at 8:50, flanked by 2 lawyers and her CFO, a thin man in his 40s who looked at Mason like he was a problem that needed solving. She was back to full corporate armor, tailored suit, perfect hair, the kind of makeup that suggested effort while looking effortless. But when she caught Mason's eye, something in her expression softened. "You ready?" she asked. "No." "Me neither." Her CFO cleared his throat. "Ms. Bennett, we should review the final documents before—" "I've reviewed them 3 times, David. I'm good." Charlotte dismissed him with a look that sent him scurrying toward the conference room. She sat down in the empty chair next to Mason. "How are you actually doing?" she asked quietly. "I feel like I'm about to make a huge mistake." "You're not." "How do you know?" "Because I've spent the last week learning what this building means. To you, to your father, to everyone who depends on it. And I'm going to take care of it. I promise." Mason wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the woman who'd shown up at 3 a.m. to fight a water main break would be the same woman making decisions 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, when he wasn't around to call her out. But trust was hard when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Thomas Chen emerged from the conference room, his professional smile already in place. "We're ready when you are." The conference room was smaller than the one where they'd first met. Just a table, some chairs, and enough lawyers to fill them. Documents were stacked in neat piles, purchase agreements and transfer papers, and all the legal language that turned something as monumental as selling a building into a series of signatures and initials. Mason sat across from Charlotte. Between them, $40 million and 40 years of history. Chen walked them through the documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Purchase price, terms, contingencies that had all been met, the property inspection that had found minor issues all resolved, the title search that had come back clean. Everything was in order. Everything was perfect. And Mason felt like he was drowning. He signed where they told him to sign, initialed where they told him to initial, listened to explanations he barely processed about escrow and wire transfers, and when exactly the building would officially change hands. Across the table, Charlotte did the same. Her signatures were quick and confident. She barely glanced at documents her lawyers had probably already explained 17 times. This was easy for her. Just another acquisition, another property added to her portfolio. Except she kept looking at him, checking in with her eyes even when her hands were signing contracts, making sure he was okay, even though there was nothing she could do if he wasn't. Final signatures here, Chen said, sliding 2 documents across the table. And we're done. Mason picked up the pen. This was it. The moment. Once he signed this last paper, Harrow Tower would belong to Charlotte Bennett. The building his father had poured his life into. The legacy Thomas Reed had left behind. Mason's hand hovered over the signature line. He thought about his father, about learning to wire electrical boxes in the basement when he was 12, about summers spent helping renovate units, painting walls, fixing toilets, doing all the unglamorous work that kept a building running, about the pride in his father's voice when he'd talk about the tenants like they were family. He thought about Ava asking if he was sad. He thought about Charlotte in a flooded lobby at 3 in the morning, covered in drywall dust and refusing to let someone else handle it. He signed. Charlotte signed. Chen collected the documents with a satisfied nod. Congratulations. As of this moment, ownership transfers to Bennett Property Holdings. Ms. Bennett, you now own Harrow Tower. There should have been champagne, or celebration, or something to mark the occasion. Instead, there was just silence. Mason stood up. His legs felt unsteady. "Excuse me," he said. "I need a minute." He walked out before anyone could respond, found the bathroom down the hall, and locked himself in a stall like a kid hiding at school. Pressed his palms against the cold metal walls and tried to breathe through whatever was happening in his chest. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. The building needed someone who could give it the attention it deserved. Someone who wasn't trying to balance it with a construction business and single parenthood and the constant exhaustion of just barely keeping everything together. Charlotte could do that, would do that. But right now, in this bathroom stall, all Mason felt was loss. A knock on the bathroom door. "Mason?" Charlotte's voice. "I'm fine," he called back. "You're not, and that's okay." He heard her come in, heard the door swing shut behind her. She shouldn't be in here. This was the men's room, but apparently she didn't care. "Can you give me a minute?" Mason asked. "No." He unlocked the stall door. Charlotte was leaning against the sink, arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was part concern and part understanding. "This is weird," he said. "You being in here." "I've done weirder." She paused. That sounded wrong. Despite everything, Mason almost laughed. "You think?" "I meant in business. I've done weirder things in business. That's not actually better." Now she did smile, just a little. "Fair point." Mason went to the sink, ran cold water, splashed it on his face. The reflection looking back at him was tired. Older than 32 had any right to look. "I thought I was ready," he said. "Thought I'd made peace with this. And now? Now I feel like I just gave away the only thing my father left me that actually mattered." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? When my mother died, she left me exactly $437 and a Bible with her name written inside. That's it. Her entire estate. And I remember sitting at her funeral thinking that I'd failed her, that I'd spent so much time building my career and proving I could succeed that I'd barely seen her the last 2 years of her life." Mason looked at her reflection in the mirror. "The money doesn't matter," Charlotte continued. "The building doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with what you're given. Your father gave you a building and you kept it running. You took care of people. You showed up at 3 in the morning when pipes burst. That's not nothing, Mason. That's everything." "But now it's yours. Now it's mine," she agreed. "And I'm going to take care of it because you taught me how. Because you showed me what it means to see people instead of profit margins. Because your father's legacy isn't the building itself. It's the way you learn to treat people with dignity. That doesn't transfer with the deed. You take that with you." Mason turned around, leaned back against the sink. "When did you get so wise?" "About a week ago when a construction worker in a coffee-stained jacket called me out for being a terrible person." "I never said you were terrible." "You didn't have to. Your daughter did." They stood in the bathroom that smelled like industrial soap and air freshener, and Mason felt something shift in his chest. Not the knot untangling completely, but loosening, just enough to breathe. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For showing up, for giving a damn, for being someone I can trust with this." Charlotte pushed off from the sink. "Come on, We should get back before they think we're doing something inappropriate in here. We are in the men's room. Details. They walked back to the conference room where lawyers were packing up documents and Charlotte's CFO was typing furiously on his phone. Chen looked relieved when they appeared. Everything all right? He asked. Everything's fine, Charlotte said. Just needed to discuss some transition details. Of course. Well, unless there are any other questions, I think we're concluded here. Handshakes all around. Congratulations that felt hollow. Charlotte's team filing out with their briefcases and their phones, and their certainty that they'd just completed a successful acquisition. Mason was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looked back at the conference room where he'd just signed away his father's legacy, and felt that loosening in his chest expand into something that almost felt like peace. Charlotte was waiting for him in the hallway. "Buy you lunch?" she asked. "Shouldn't you be getting back to your office?" "Probably, but I'm playing hooky. Come on, I know a place." The place she knew turned out to be a hole-in-the-wall Thai restaurant, tucked between a dry cleaner and a currency exchange. The kind of spot you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside it was small and cramped, and the menu was written on a chalkboard in handwriting so messy it was barely legible. "This is your place?" Mason asked. "I used to come here when I was in grad school, working 3 jobs, taking out loans I'm still paying off, eating pad thai that cost $4 because it was all I could afford." Charlotte slid into a booth that had duct tape holding the vinyl together. "I haven't been back in probably 5 years. Why today?" "Because today feels like it should be marked somehow. And champagne in a boardroom wasn't right. This felt right." A woman emerged from the kitchen, tiny, probably 60, with gray hair and an apron covered in stains. Her face lit up when she saw Charlotte. "Charlotte Bennett, I thought you were dead." Charlotte laughed. "Hi, Mrs. Somchai. You disappear for 5 years, I assume dead. But no, you just become too fancy for my restaurant." "I'm not too fancy. I've just been busy." "Too busy for pad thai? That's too busy." Mrs. Somchai turned her attention to Mason. "Who's this? Boyfriend? Business associate?" Charlotte said quickly. "Business associate." Mrs. Somchai made a face like she didn't believe that for a second. "Fine. What do you want to eat?" They ordered pad thai for Charlotte, drunken noodles for Mason, spring rolls to share. Mrs. Somchai disappeared into the kitchen, muttering something in Thai that probably wasn't complimentary. "She seems nice," Mason said. "She's terrifying, but her food is incredible." They sat in the booth with its duct-taped vinyl and wobbly table, and for the first time since signing the papers, Mason felt himself relax. Not completely, but enough. "So," Charlotte said, "you're officially my consultant now." "Officially? What happens next?" "Next, we start the actual work. Lease renewals, tenant relations, making sure your property management team understands that profit isn't the only metric that matters. My CFO is going to love that." "Your CFO can deal with it." Charlotte smiled. "He really is going to hate you." "Good, I'm not here to be liked." Their food arrived in portions that were probably twice what they'd ordered. Mrs. Somchai set down plates with authority. "You eat," she commanded. "Both of you too skinny." "I'm not too skinny," Mason protested. "You are skinny. Eat." She disappeared again. Charlotte was already digging into her pad thai with the enthusiasm of someone revisiting a memory. "Oh my God," she said around a mouthful. "I forgot how good this is." Mason tried his noodles. She wasn't wrong. Whatever Mrs. Somchai was doing in that kitchen, it worked. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the lunch rush was picking up. People hurrying past the windows, bundled against the cold, living their lives without knowing that the 2 people in the corner booth had just completed a $40 million transaction. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte said. "You're going to anyway. What are you going to do with the money?" Mason had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Pay off my mortgage, set up a college fund for Ava, take that vacation she wants to somewhere with adventure cold and penguins." He paused. "Save the rest. For emergencies, for the future, for whatever comes next." "That's very responsible." "I have a kid. Responsible is kind of the job. You could do something for yourself, though. Buy something, take a real vacation, actually enjoy it." "I am enjoying it. Knowing my daughter's education is covered, that's enjoyment." Charlotte set down her fork. You're a better person than I am. I'm not. I'm just tired of pretending money is the point. What is the point? Mason thought about Ava's face that morning. Her absolute certainty that penguins and adventure cold were important. Her trust that he'd figure it out because he always did. The point is being there, he said. Showing up. Making sure the people who depend on you know they can depend on you. Everything else is just, he gestured vaguely. Details. Charlotte was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Your wife. Ava's mother. What happened? The question came out of nowhere but somehow didn't feel intrusive. Just honest. Like she was trying to understand him, and that required knowing the parts he usually kept hidden. Cancer, Mason said. Pancreatic. By the time they found it, it was stage 4. She was gone in 3 months. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Mason picked at his noodles. Ava was 3. Barely understood what was happening. Just knew Mommy was sick, and then Mommy was gone, and Daddy was trying to hold everything together while falling apart. How did you do it? I don't know. I just woke up every morning and made breakfast and changed diapers and went to work and came home and read bedtime stories and fell into bed and did it again the next day. Eventually the days turned into weeks, turned into months, turned into 3 years, and here we are. That's not nothing. Feels like nothing sometimes. Charlotte reached across the table, put her hand on his. The gesture was surprising, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with human connection. It's not nothing, she said again. You raised a daughter who defends her father to strangers, who draws pictures of buildings because she's proud of you, who believes you can fix anything. That's everything, Mason. He looked at her hand on his, small, warm, steady. Thank you, he said. She pulled her hand back, seemed to realize what she'd done, looked slightly embarrassed. Sorry, I don't usually... I'm not a very touchy person. It's okay. I appreciated it. They finished lunch while Mrs. Somchai watched from the kitchen with eagle eyes and an expression that suggested she was still convinced they were dating. When the check came, Charlotte grabbed it before Mason could. My treat, she said. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? New beginnings, second chances, really good pad thai. She left cash on the table and stood. Come on, I want to show you something. They walked back toward Harrow Tower through streets that had warmed up slightly. The sun was actually visible today, weak but present, trying its best to cut through Chicago winter gray. Charlotte led him to the building and up to the 40th floor, the same conference room where they'd first met. The same floor-to-ceiling windows with the same view of the city, but something was different. On the wall behind where she'd sat that first day was a framed photograph, black and white. A construction worker, young, maybe late 20s, standing in front of a modest office building. He was smiling at the camera, hard hat in hand, pride evident in his stance. Mason's breath caught. Where did you get that? Ray had it. Said your father kept it in his office. It's from when he first bought this building. Before the renovations. Before everything. Charlotte stood next to him, both of them looking at the photograph. I wanted it here, as a reminder. Of what? That buildings are built by people. For people. That the numbers and the deals and the profit margins, all of that is secondary to the humans involved. She turned to look at him. That's what you've been trying to teach me, what your father understood. I wanted something to help me remember on days when it's easy to forget. Mason stared at the photograph of his father, 20-something years old, full of dreams and determination. No idea that 40 years later, his son would be standing in this room, looking at this picture and trying not to cry. He'd like this, Mason said quietly. He'd like that you're trying. I am trying. I'm going to keep trying. And when I screw up, because I will screw up, I need you to call me out. Same way you did in the lobby, that first day. That's a lot of pressure to put on your consultant. Good thing I'm paying you well. Mason smiled despite the tightness in his throat. We never discussed payment. We'll figure it out. Probably more than you'd charge and less than you deserve. They stood in front of the photograph for a while longer. Then Charlotte's phone started buzzing with the insistence of an office that had been without its CEO for too long. I have to go, she said reluctantly. Conference call in 15 minutes, but thank you for today, for trusting me with this. Thank you for earning that trust. She left in a hurry, heels clicking down the hallway, already on her phone before she reached the elevator. Back to being the powerful CEO who ran a multi-million-dollar investment firm. But she'd been something else today, something more human, more real. Mason stood alone in the conference room, looking at his father's photograph and out at the city beyond the windows. His city. His father's city. Now, Charlotte's responsibility. His phone buzzed. Text from Ava's school. Early dismissal today. Teacher in service. Can you pick up by 1? Mason checked the time. 12:40. He'd have to leave now to make it. He took one last look at the photograph. I hope I did right by you, Dad. I really do. Then he left, taking the elevator down through the building that was no longer his, past Ray at the security desk, who gave him a knowing nod, through the lobby that smelled like floor polish and coffee and history, and out into the December cold. He picked up Ava right on time. She ran out of the school building with her backpack bouncing, her penguin hat askew, her face bright with the uncomplicated joy of early dismissal. Can we get ice cream? She asked immediately. It's December. So it's freezing outside. Ice cream doesn't care about weather. Mason laughed. Fair point. Yeah, we can get ice cream. They went to the place 2 blocks from their apartment that stayed open year-round despite the fact that nobody in their right mind ate ice cream in Chicago winter. Ava got strawberry in a cup. Mason got coffee because apparently he was a glutton for punishment. They sat at a small table by the window, Ava swinging her legs and talking about her day. Something about art class and a kid named Trevor who'd spilled paint everywhere, and how her teacher said her drawing of the tower was really good, and could she keep doing drawings maybe forever as her job? You want to be an artist? Mason asked. Maybe. Or a penguin scientist. I haven't decided. Those are very different careers. I have time. 6 years old and already more certain about life than he was. Mason envied that. Daddy? Ava was looking at him with those serious eyes. Did you sell the building today? Yeah, baby, I did. Are you sad? He thought about that. About the knot in his stomach that morning, about the bathroom stall and Charlotte finding him in the pad thai and his father's photograph on the wall. I was sad, he said, but I think I'm okay now. Because the pretty lady is going to take care of it? Yeah, because of that. Ava nodded like this made perfect sense. I like her. She's nice. She's trying to be nice. That's different. But trying is good, right? You always say trying is important. Mason felt something warm spread through his chest. Yeah, sweetheart, trying is very important. They finished their ice cream, walked home through streets where Christmas lights were starting to come on as afternoon faded toward evening. Ava chattering about penguins and art and whether ice cream counted as dinner if you also had vitamins. The apartment was cold again, the radiator acting up for the 4th time this month. Mason made a mental note to call the super, then realized that with the money from the sale, he could just move somewhere with heat that actually worked. The thought should have been exciting. Freedom, options, the ability to choose where they lived instead of just making do with what they could afford. But all Mason felt was tired. He made Ava an actual dinner, chicken nuggets and carrots because he was out of energy for anything more creative. She ate while watching a show about ocean animals that she'd seen 17 times before. He cleaned up the kitchen and thought about Charlotte and the building and his father's photograph and what came next. His phone buzzed. Text from Charlotte. Sent over the consulting agreement, take your time reviewing. No rush. He opened the attachment, scrolled through pages of legal language that boiled down to, he'd spend 6 months helping her manage the transition, she'd pay him more than he'd expected, and they'd figure out the rest as they went. At the bottom, a note in what looked like her actual handwriting. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I can do this right. I won't let you down. Mason typed back. I know you won't. Then he signed the agreement electronically and sent it back before he could second-guess himself. Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. I'm sleepy. It's only 6:30. I'm still sleepy. Mason picked her up even though she was getting too big for it, carried her to her room and tucked her in with her penguin stuffed animal and the blanket that was worn thin from being loved. Tell me a story, she mumbled. What kind of story? A true one. Mason thought for a moment. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a man who built something really special, and he worked really hard to make sure it stayed special. And when he died, he left it to his son, who was worried he couldn't take care of it as good as his father did. Is this about Grandpa's building? Ava's eyes were barely open. Yeah. What happened to the son? The son realized he didn't have to do it alone, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone else to help carry something important. Did they live happily ever after? Mason smoothed her hair back from her face. They're still working on it, but I think they're going to be okay. Good, Ava yawned. I like happy stories. Me too, baby. She was asleep in minutes. Mason sat on the edge of her bed watching her breathe, this small human who'd become his entire world, and felt the weight of the day finally settle on his shoulders. He'd sold his father's building. He'd trusted Charlotte Bennett. He'd taken a leap into uncertainty. And somehow, sitting in his daughter's room with the radiator clanging and Mrs. Kowalski's television humming through the walls and all the ordinary sounds of their ordinary life, Mason felt like maybe he'd done the right thing. Maybe his father would be proud. Maybe Charlotte would keep her promises. Maybe 6 months from now, he'd be able to let go completely. Or maybe he'd just learned that letting go wasn't the point, that staying connected while learning to trust someone else. That was the point. Mason stood up carefully, kissed Ava's forehead, and walked out to his own room where exhaustion was waiting to claim him. Tomorrow he'd start his new job as a consultant. Tomorrow he'd help Charlotte navigate the complicated reality of owning a building full of people with lives and dreams and problems. Tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. But tonight he was just a tired father who'd survived another day. And sometimes that was enough. 6 weeks later, Mason stood in the lobby of Harrow Tower watching Charlotte argue with her CFO and realized something had shifted, not just in the building, in her. I don't care what the quarterly projections say, David. We're not raising rent on the residential units more than 3%. That's final. David's face was red. 3% doesn't even cover our increased operating costs. We need at least 7% to maintain current margins. Then we maintain lower margins. Miss Bennett, with all due respect, David, I own this building. Not you. Not the board. Me. And I'm telling you 3%. Charlotte's voice was steel wrapped in silk. If you can't work within that parameter, I'm happy to find a CFO who can. David opened his mouth, closed it, nodded stiffly, and walked away muttering something about unrealistic expectations. Charlotte turned to Mason. Too harsh? No, just right. He's going to complain to the board. Let him. You're doing the right thing. She smiled, tired but genuine. I'm trying. Some days it's harder than others. The last 6 weeks had been a masterclass in controlled chaos. Charlotte learning the building's rhythms. Mason teaching her which tenants needed gentle handling and which ones responded better to directness. Together they'd navigated 2 more minor emergencies, renegotiated a dozen leases, and fired a property manager who'd been skimming maintenance fees for 3 years. It hadn't been smooth. Charlotte still defaulted to spreadsheet thinking sometimes. Still had to catch herself before making decisions based purely on profit. Still struggled with seeing people instead of units. But she was trying, really trying. And slowly the building was responding. You have time for coffee? Charlotte asked. Always. They walked to Marty's because that had become their routine. Thursday mornings, coffee and pie, and honest conversations about what was working and what wasn't. Marty looked up when they entered, his weathered face creasing into something almost like a smile. The usual? He called. Please, Charlotte said, sliding into their regular booth. Their regular booth. When had that happened? When had this become a routine instead of an obligation? Marty brought coffee and 2 slices of apple pie without asking. Charlotte had stopped protesting the pie 3 weeks ago. Now she just ate it and occasionally admitted it was good. So, she said, wrapping her hands around her mug, I got the proposal from Mrs. Patterson. Mason had helped Mrs. Patterson draft it, a request for a small expansion into the vacant unit next to her flower shop. Nothing major, just enough room to add a workspace and maybe take on an assistant. And? He asked. And I approved it. Rent stays the same. She just gets more space. Charlotte took a sip of coffee. David nearly had a stroke when I told him. David needs to relax. David needs to understand that not everything is about maximizing profit. You really have changed. Charlotte looked at him over her mug. You sound surprised. I am, a little. Most people don't actually change, they just get better at pretending. Is that what you think I'm doing? Pretending? Mason considered that. No, I don't think you're pretending. I think you're fighting against every instinct you developed over 10 years of climbing corporate ladders. And some days you win that fight, and some days you don't. But you keep fighting. That's exhausting. Yeah, change usually is. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, snow was falling again. It had been snowing on and off for 2 days. The city was buried under 6 inches of white that had already turned gray from car exhaust and foot traffic. Ava's school called, Mason said. Winter concert is next week. She's singing a solo. That's great. She wants you to come. Charlotte's eyebrows rose. Me? She likes you, talks about you all the time. The pretty lady who owns Daddy's building and who's trying really hard to be nice. Trying really hard. That's quite the endorsement. It's better than what she said about you 6 weeks ago. What did she say 6 weeks ago? That you were mean and you made me sad. Charlotte winced. Kids are brutal. Kids are honest. There's a difference. So she thinks I'm trying now. That's progress. It is. So will you come to the concert? Charlotte pulled out her phone, checked her calendar, frowned. I have a meeting with investors that afternoon. Okay. But I can move it. She was already typing. What time? 7. At the school auditorium. I'll be there. Mason felt something warm settle in his chest. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. Charlotte set down her phone. Ava defended you to a stranger when I was being terrible. The least I can do is show up when she sings. She'll be thrilled. Don't tell her yet. I don't want to disappoint her if something comes up. Nothing's going to come up. You don't know that. I do, because you just moved a meeting with investors. That's not something you do lightly. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. No, it's not. They finished their coffee. Charlotte paid like she always did, leaving extra because Marty's prices hadn't changed since 1987, and she felt guilty about it. They walked back to the tower through snow that was getting heavier, the kind that meant the city would slow down and schools would maybe close tomorrow, and everyone would pretend to be surprised even though this was Chicago in December. Ray was at the security desk dealing with a delivery. He waved as they passed. Mr. Reed, Ms. Bennett, package came for you, Ms. Bennett. I signed for it. Thanks, Ray. They took the elevator up. Charlotte got off on 40 to deal with whatever crisis her office had manufactured in her absence. Mason continued to 12, where he was meeting with the new property manager about the heating system. His phone buzzed. Text from Emma. You're ignoring me. He typed back. I'm busy. Too busy to call your sister back? It's been 2 weeks. I'll call this weekend. You said that last weekend. And the weekend before. Mason sighed and hit dial. Emma answered on the first ring. Finally, I was starting to think you'd blocked my number. I wouldn't block you. You would if you could figure out how. Her voice softened. How are you really doing? And don't say fine. I'm okay. That's not fine, but it's also not okay. Try again. Mason looked out the window at the snow. I'm adjusting. The sale went through. Charlotte's doing good work with the building. Ava's happy. I'm keeping busy with consulting. And how do you feel about all that? Like you're trying to therapize me. Someone needs to. You've been holding everything together for 3 years without dealing with any of it. There's nothing to deal with, Em. Sarah died, Dad died. You're raising Ava alone and working 2 jobs, and you sold the building that's been in our family for 40 years. That's a lot of nothing. Mason's jaw tightened. What do you want me to say? I want you to say how you actually feel instead of just powering through like you always do. I feel fine. Mason, I'm in the middle of something. I'll call you this weekend, I promise. He hung up before she could argue. Felt guilty immediately. Emma was trying to help. She always tried to help. But sometimes help felt like pressure, and he had enough of that already. The meeting with the property manager took 2 hours. By the time Mason finished, it was almost 4. He picked up Ava from after-school care, and they walked home through snow that had accumulated another inch. Daddy, can Charlotte really come to my concert? Ava asked. I told you not to get excited yet. But can she? Maybe. She's going to try. I hope she comes. I want her to hear me sing. You're going to do great whether she's there or not. Ava was quiet for a moment. Do you like her? Charlotte? Yeah, she's doing good work with the building. No, I mean, do you like her? Mason stopped walking, looked down at his 6-year-old daughter who was watching him with those two knowing eyes. Where did that come from? You smile different when you talk about her. I don't smile different. You do. And you check your phone more. And last week you wore your nice shirt on Thursday, and you only wear nice shirts for special things. Mason had no idea what to say to that. Charlotte is my business partner, that's all. Okay? Ava didn't sound convinced. They got home. Mason made dinner, spaghetti, because it was easy, and Ava actually ate it. They did homework, read stories, the normal routine of their normal life. But later, after Ava was asleep and Mason was sitting alone in the kitchen with a beer he wasn't really drinking, he thought about what she'd said. Do you like her? The question was absurd. Charlotte was what? His business partner, his friend, maybe, if you could call someone you'd known for 6 weeks and who'd started by insulting your daughter a friend. Someone he respected. Someone he was helping. But like her? In that way? No, that was ridiculous. Except he had worn his nice shirt on Thursday, and he did check his phone more often. And when she laughed at something he said, he felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with coffee or pie or business arrangements. Mason took a drink of beer that had gone warm. You're an idiot, he told himself. His phone buzzed. Text from Charlotte. Confirmed for the concert. Moved 3 meetings. Don't make me regret this. He smiled despite himself. Typed back, you won't. Ava's going to be thrilled. What about you? Are you thrilled that my daughter gets to show off for someone she admires? Yeah. I'm thrilled. Good. See you Thursday. Mason stared at that message for longer than he should. Then he set his phone down and finished his warm beer and went to bed without thinking too hard about 6-year-olds who noticed things like different smiles and nice shirts. Thursday arrived cold and clear. The kind of winter day where the sky was blue and painful to look at, and the sun gave light without warmth. Mason dropped Ava at school, went to the tower for a meeting about lease renewals, had lunch with Charlotte where they argued about rent control policies and didn't agree on anything but somehow still enjoyed themselves, then picked up Ava early so she could get ready for the concert. She changed outfits 4 times, argued about whether her penguin hat counted as formal wear. Finally settled on a red dress and tights that didn't quite match, but she loved anyway. Do I look pretty? She asked, twirling in front of the mirror. You look beautiful. Will Charlotte think so? Charlotte will think you look perfect. They arrived at the school at 6:30. The auditorium was already filling up, parents and grandparents and siblings, all packed into seats that were too small and too close together. The stage was decorated with paper snowflakes and a banner that said Winter Wonderland in letters that definitely involved glitter, and probably some crying first graders. Mason found seats near the middle, saved one for Charlotte with his coat, 6:45. No Charlotte. 6:50. Still no Charlotte. Ava kept turning around to look at the entrance. Is she coming? She said she would. But what if she doesn't? Then we'll still have a great time watching you sing. But Ava looked disappointed, and Mason felt anger starting to build in his chest. If Charlotte had blown this off, if she'd let his daughter down after promising... At 6:58, Charlotte rushed through the auditorium doors. She was still in her business suit, her hair slightly messy like she'd been running, her face flushed from cold. She spotted Mason, waved, started making her way down the row. Sorry, she said breathlessly, sliding into the seat he'd saved. Meeting ran long and then traffic was terrible and... Sorry, I made it though. Ava was beaming. You came. Of course I came. I promised. Charlotte smoothed her hair, tried to look composed. You look beautiful, by the way. That dress is perfect. Daddy said you'd think so. Daddy was right. The lights dimmed. A teacher walked on stage to welcome everyone and explain the program. Mason settled into his seat, very aware of Charlotte sitting next to him. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Close enough that when she shifted, her shoulder brushed his arm. The concert started. First graders singing Jingle Bells off key. Second graders doing a dance to Frosty the Snowman that involved a lot of kids going the wrong direction. Third graders attempting a 3-part harmony that was almost successful. Then Ava's class took the stage. Mason's heart started beating faster. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. The music teacher gave a signal. The kids started singing Silent Night, and then Ava stepped forward for her solo verse. Her voice was small but clear. A little shaky on the high notes, but she held them anyway. She looked terrified and brave and absolutely beautiful, standing there in her red dress and mismatched tights singing about sleep and heavenly peace. Mason felt his throat tighten, heard Charlotte inhale sharply beside him. And then it was over. Ava stepped back. The class finished the song. Parents applauded. The kids bowed and filed off the stage. Charlotte was wiping her eyes. "Are you crying?" Mason asked quietly. "No, allergies. It's December. Indoor allergies," Mason smiled. "She was good, wasn't she?" "She was amazing." Charlotte was still wiping her eyes. "I wasn't expecting to. I don't usually. It's okay. She has that effect on people." The rest of the concert passed in a blur. More classes, more songs. Finally, the whole school on stage for one last number that involved jingle bells and choreography that fell apart halfway through, but nobody cared. Then it was over. Parents flooding toward the stage to collect their kids. Mason and Charlotte made their way through the crowd to where Ava was standing with her class. She saw them and ran over, launching herself at Mason first, then turning to Charlotte. "Did you hear me? Was I good?" "You were perfect," Charlotte said. "Absolutely perfect." "I was scared." "You didn't look scared. You looked brave." "Brave is just scared, but doing it anyway," Ava said seriously. "That's what Daddy tells me." Charlotte looked at Mason. "Smart dad?" "I have my moments." They walked out into the cold where snow was starting again, light flakes that caught in Ava's hair and made her laugh. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she asked. "It's almost 8, Mason said. "That's pretty late." "But I sang really good." "Really well," Mason corrected automatically. "Really well. So can we?" Charlotte spoke up before Mason could answer. "There's a place 2 blocks from here that makes incredible hot chocolate. My treat. If that's okay with your dad?" Ava looked at Mason with pleading eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, but just one. Then home and bed." The place Charlotte knew was a small cafe that stayed open late and catered to the after-concert crowd. They found a table in the corner, ordered hot chocolate for Ava and coffee for the adults because some habits were hard to break. Ava talked non-stop about the concert, about how Madison had forgotten her words and how Tyler had fallen off the risers during practice, and how the music teacher had said Ava's solo was the best she'd ever heard from a first grader, which was probably an exaggeration, but Ava believed it completely. Charlotte listened with genuine attention, asked questions, laughed at the right parts, made Ava feel heard in a way that mattered. Mason watched them together and felt that warmth in his chest expand into something bigger, something that felt dangerous and hopeful at the same time. When Ava's hot chocolate was gone and her energy was finally starting to fade, they bundled back into coats and scarves and headed out into the night. "I can drive you home," Charlotte offered. "My car's just around the corner. We're fine walking. It's freezing and late. Let me drive you." Mason was about to argue when Ava yawned so big her jaw cracked. "Okay," he conceded. "Thanks." Charlotte's Tesla was warm and quiet and smelled like leather and that subtle perfume. Ava fell asleep in the back seat before they'd gone 3 blocks. Mason gave directions to their building, watching the city pass outside the window. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me." "Ava really wanted you there." "What about you? Did you want me there?" Mason looked at her. She was watching the road, but something in her expression suggested the question mattered more than she was letting on. "Yeah," he said. "I wanted you there." They pulled up in front of his building. Mason reached back to wake Ava, but Charlotte stopped him. "Let her sleep. I'll help you get her upstairs." "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to. I want..." So Mason carried his sleeping daughter while Charlotte grabbed his bag and followed them up 3 flights of stairs to an apartment that suddenly felt very small and shabby compared to the world she usually occupied. But Charlotte didn't seem to notice, just helped him get Ava out of her coat and shoes and into bed without waking her. They stood in the doorway of Ava's room, watching her sleep. "She's special," Charlotte said quietly. "You're raising someone really special." "I'm trying." "You're succeeding." Mason pulled Ava's door mostly closed and led Charlotte back to the living room. It was late. She should leave. He should thank her again and let her go home. But he didn't want her to leave. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte said. "Why did you really agree to stay on as a consultant? I know what you told me before about not knowing how to let go, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Mason sat on the couch. After a moment, Charlotte sat too. Not too close, but not too far either. "I wanted to make sure you do right by the building," he said, "by my father's legacy, and I didn't trust that you would. And now? Now I think you're going to do more than right by it. I think you're going to make it something even better than it was." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "That first day, in the lobby, when I spilled coffee on you and said all those terrible things, you don't have to—" "Let me finish. That was the worst version of myself, the person I'd become without realizing it. And you called me out. Made me see it, made me want to be better." She turned to look at him. Nobody had done that in years. People either told me what I wanted to hear or stayed silent when I was wrong. But you didn't. You stood there in your coffee-stained jacket and told me exactly what I needed to hear, even though it cost you. That's— Her voice caught. "That's rare. I was just defending my kid." "You were being honest. There's a difference." They sat in the small living room with its secondhand furniture and radiator that clanged and all the ordinary evidence of a life lived on a budget. Charlotte looked completely out of place and somehow perfectly at home at the same time. "Can I tell you something?" Mason said. "Always. I was terrified of you. That first day. Not of you personally, but of what you represented. Someone who was going to come in and change everything and not care about the people those changes affected. Someone who saw dollar signs instead of humans. And now? Now I think you're one of the most decent people I've met, and I'm glad Ava has you in her life, that we both do." Charlotte's eyes were bright. "That means a lot." "It's true." They sat there for a moment longer. The space between them felt charged with something neither one wanted to name. Charlotte stood up. "I should go. It's late." "Yeah." Mason stood too. "Thank you again for coming, for moving your meetings, for caring. Thank you for giving me a reason to care." He walked her to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "Mason?" "Yeah? This, what we're doing with the building and the consulting and all of it, it's not just business anymore, is it?" "No," he said honestly. "It's not." "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page." She left before he could respond. Mason stood in his doorway listening to her footsteps fade down the stairs, the building door open and close, the sound of her car starting outside. Then he went back inside, checked on Ava one more time, and sat on his couch trying to process what had just happened. 6 weeks ago, Charlotte Bennett had been a stranger who'd insulted his daughter and made him question whether selling the building was the biggest mistake of his life. Now she was someone who moved investor meetings to watch a first-grade concert, who cried during solos and helped carry sleeping children upstairs, and sat in shabby living rooms talking about what mattered. Now she was someone who made him smile different and check his phone too often and wear nice shirts on Thursdays. Now she was someone who felt like maybe, possibly, the beginning of something he hadn't been looking for but needed anyway. Mason's phone buzzed. Text from Charlotte. "Made it home. Thanks again for tonight. Tell Ava she was perfect." He typed back, "Will do. Drive safe." Then, before he could think better of it, "Same time next Thursday? Coffee and pie?" Her response came quickly. "Wouldn't miss it." Mason set his phone down and sat in the quiet apartment, thinking about change and trust, and all the ways life surprised you when you stopped trying to control it. The radiator clanged. Mrs. Kowalski's television hummed through the walls. Snow fell outside the window, turning the city soft and temporary. And somewhere across town, Charlotte Bennett was probably thinking about the same things he was. About concerts and hot chocolate and small living rooms where something had shifted between them. About how sometimes the best things in life came from the moments that started out worst. About how you could spill coffee on someone and insult their daughter and still somehow find your way to sitting beside them at a school concert 6 weeks later, crying over Silent Night and meaning it. The next morning, Mason woke up to Ava jumping on his bed. "Daddy! Daddy! Look!" She shoved her phone, the old one he'd given her for emergencies, in his face. On the screen was a text from Charlotte. "You were the star of the show last night. Thanks for letting me be there to see it. Here's a little something for the Penguin Fund." Below the message was a photo. A donation receipt. $5,000 to the Chicago Aquarium's Penguin Habitat Adoption Program. In Ava's name. She bought me penguins! Ava was bouncing so hard the bed shook. Real penguins. Well, not real, but adoption penguins. Can we go see them, please? Mason stared at the receipt. $5,000. For a 6-year-old who'd mentioned penguins exactly twice in Charlotte's presence. He typed back, "This is too much." Charlotte's response came immediately. "It's exactly right. Besides, I needed a tax write-off. Nobody needs a $5,000 tax write-off for penguins. I do. And Ava deserves it. Let me do this." Mason looked at his daughter's face. Pure joy, uncomplicated happiness. "Thank you," he typed. "This means everything to her." Good. That was the point. They went to the aquarium that Saturday, all 3 of them. Charlotte met them at the entrance wearing jeans and a winter coat and minimal makeup, looking more relaxed than Mason had ever seen her. Ava grabbed her hand immediately. "Come on, the penguins are this way." Charlotte let herself be dragged through the crowds to the penguin habitat, where Ava pressed her face against the glass and talked nonstop about species and habitats and which one was definitely hers, even though they all looked identical. Mason hung back, watching Charlotte crouch down to Ava's level, pointing at different penguins, asking questions that Ava answered with absolute authority, despite having learned everything from a nature documentary last week. This was someone who had shown up at 3 a.m. to fight a water main break, who'd moved investor meetings for a school concert, who'd donated $5,000 to penguins because a 6-year-old loved them. This was someone who was trying, really trying. And somewhere in the last 6 weeks, Mason had stopped seeing her as the woman who'd spilled coffee on him and started seeing her as someone who mattered, someone who fit into his life in ways he hadn't expected and didn't entirely understand but didn't want to lose. They spent 3 hours at the aquarium, saw dolphins and sharks and a beluga whale that made Ava scream with delight. Got lunch at the cafe where Ava insisted on fish sticks because it's only fair we eat fish where fish live. Charlotte laughed, an actual full laugh that made her whole face light up. And Mason thought, I'm in trouble, because this felt like more than business, more than friendship, more than any of the safe categories he'd been using to avoid admitting what was actually happening. This felt like falling for someone, which was terrifying because he hadn't fallen for anyone since Sarah, hadn't wanted to. Hadn't had room in his life for anything except survival and Ava and getting through each day without completely falling apart. But here he was, in an aquarium, watching Charlotte help his daughter identify different species of jellyfish, feeling something warm and dangerous growing in his chest. His phone rang. Emma. He almost didn't answer, but she'd been calling all week and he'd been avoiding her, and eventually he'd have to deal with that. Hey, he answered, stepping away from Charlotte and Ava. Finally, I was starting to think you'd died. Emma's voice was sharp. Where have you been? Busy. Too busy to call your sister? I'm calling now. Because I called you first. She sighed. Look, I'm worried about you. You sold Dad's building. You're consulting for some CEO you barely know. I'm fine, Em. You keep saying that, but I don't believe you. When are you going to actually deal with everything instead of just pushing through? Mason watched Ava point at something in a tank, watched Charlotte lean in to see better, watched 2 people he cared about existing in the same space and making each other happy. I am dealing with it, he said quietly, just not the way you think I should. What does that mean? It means I'm figuring things out, on my own timeline, in my own way. And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Do you? Know what you're doing? Mason thought about that, about coffee at Marty's and lease negotiations and pipe bursts at 3 a.m., about school concerts and penguin donations and the way Charlotte looked at him, sometimes like she was seeing something she hadn't expected either. No, he admitted, but I'm okay with that. Emma was quiet for a moment. Who's the woman? What woman? The one I can hear in the background. The one who's making you sound different. There's no... Mason stopped. How do you do that? I'm your sister. I know things. So who is she? Her name's Charlotte. She bought the building. And? And we're working together. And she's been good for Ava. And I don't know what else to tell you. You could tell me if you like her. Mason looked across the aquarium at Charlotte, who was now carrying Ava on her shoulders so she could see into a tall tank, both of them laughing about something. "Yeah," he said. "I like her." "Good. You deserve to like someone. You deserve to be happy." "I am happy. I mean actually happy, not just functioning happy." "I know what you meant." They talked for a few more minutes. Emma extracted a promise that he'd call more often and maybe visit Portland in the spring and stop avoiding her like she was the enemy. Then she let him go. Mason walked back to Charlotte and Ava. They were sitting on a bench now, Ava between them, eating ice cream despite the fact that it was barely 1 in the afternoon. "Everything okay?" Charlotte asked. "Yeah, just my sister checking in." "The one who worries about you?" "That's the one. Smart sister." Ava leaned against Charlotte's arm, getting ice cream on her coat. Charlotte didn't seem to notice or care. Mason sat down on Ava's other side. They stayed there for a while, 3 people on a bench in an aquarium, eating ice cream and watching families pass by and not talking because they didn't need to. This, Mason thought, this is what I've been missing. Not romance necessarily, though maybe that too eventually if they could figure it out. But this, connection. Someone who showed up, someone who tried, someone who made his daughter laugh and made him want to be better, and made their small life feel bigger somehow. That night, after Ava was in bed, Mason sat at his kitchen table with a beer and his laptop. Pulled up the consulting agreement he'd signed 6 weeks ago. The one that said 6 months and then they'd reevaluate. 4.5 months left. Then what? Walk away? Go back to just running his construction business and being Ava's dad and letting Charlotte manage the building on her own? The thought felt wrong. Incomplete. His phone buzzed. Text from Charlotte. "Today was perfect. Thank you for letting me be part of it." He typed back. "Thank you. For the penguins. For showing up. For everything. That's what friends do." Friends? The word felt both accurate and insufficient. "Is that what we are?" he typed. "Friends?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I don't know. What do you want us to be?" Mason stared at that question for a long time. What did he want? He wanted Thursday morning coffee to continue. He wanted someone to call at 3 a.m. when things broke. He wanted Ava to keep having someone in her life who showed up and cared and made her feel special. He wanted Charlotte, in whatever form that took, whatever she was willing to give. "I want us to figure it out together," he typed finally. No pressure, no timeline, just see where this goes. The response took longer this time, but when it came, it made him smile. "I'd like that. A lot." "Good. Me too. See you Thursday? Wouldn't miss it." Mason set his phone down, finished his beer, sat in his kitchen with its radiator that clanged and its table that wobbled and all the familiar evidence of a life that was changing in ways he couldn't predict and didn't want to control. 6 weeks ago, he'd sold his father's building and thought he was letting go of everything that mattered. Now he understood that letting go wasn't the same as losing, that sometimes you had to release something to discover what it could become, that his father's legacy wasn't the building itself. It was the lesson Thomas Reed had spent 40 years teaching, that people mattered more than property, that dignity wasn't something you owned but something you gave, that the measure of your life wasn't what you accumulated but what you shared. Charlotte was learning that lesson now, teaching it to her CFO and her board, and everyone who thought buildings were just assets and tenants were just revenue streams. And maybe in teaching her, Mason had learned something too, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. That trust was a choice you made every day. That love, whatever form it took, was worth the risk of being hurt. That sometimes the best things in life started with spilled coffee and terrible first impressions, and finding your way back from the brink of being someone you didn't want to be. The snow was falling again outside his window. Chicago buried under winter white. The city sleeping and waking and moving forward because that's what cities did, what people did, what life demanded. Mason cleaned up his beer bottle, checked on Ava one last time, went to bed thinking about Thursday morning and penguin habitats and a woman who'd started as a mistake and become something essential. 4.5 months left on the consulting agreement, but Mason had a feeling they'd figure out what came after, together. Because that's what you did when you found someone worth keeping. You figured it out. You showed up. You tried. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that was enough. In the morning, Mason woke to another text from Charlotte. Just a photo this time. The view from her office window. The sun rising over Lake Michigan. The city waking up below. And a simple message. Another day. Let's make it count. Mason smiled and typed back, always. Then he got up to make breakfast for his daughter, to start another day of consulting and construction work and all the ordinary moments that made up a life. But nothing felt quite as ordinary anymore. Because Charlotte Bennett had spilled coffee on him 6 weeks ago and changed everything. Because his father's building was in good hands. Because Ava had penguins and a person who showed up and a future that looked brighter than it had in 3 years. Because sometimes you had to break something to fix what was actually wrong. And sometimes the person who broke you was the same person who helped put you back together. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but whole enough to keep going. Strong enough to try again. Brave enough to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. And in a city that never stopped moving, in a building full of people whose lives intersected and diverged and touched each other in ways they'd never fully understand, that was enough. That was everything.